Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Very excited to be here. It is Thursday, July 14th, and we are talking a couple of different topics today, which is kind of exciting. We're going to touch on a little bit of breaking news, and then we're going to talk a little bit of Tyler Buchner and what he brings to the table. How can he be successful at Notre Dame?
And why there's such this weird gap in how some people view him, and we'll dive on that. And
we're gonna remind people why we were so excited about Tyler Buchner and why we are still excited about Tyler Buchner. So that I'm excited to kind of get into this because I feel like with all the recruiting news and everything that's going on, people have forgotten there's a pretty darn quarterback already on campus at Notre Dame who's getting ready to, I think, turn some heads. So we're going to have some fun with that.
A couple good quarterbacks. One even better than the other.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Absolutely. So excited to get in touch with that. Remember, always, you can check out premium information over on the boards. Make sure you sign up for all the good stuff, the intel, and let's make sure we keep it on the boards. I just want to throw that out there because that's very important.
Do not be that guy that goes and runs into other chats and other shows talking about stuff that we have talked about on our message board. If it's something we say in this show, it's fair game.
Absolutely.
If it's something I write in a story that's published, just published story on irishbreakdown.com, fair game.
Absolutely.
That's all free and out there information. The message board, and maybe some people don't understand, the message board is meant to be a private place for people who choose to be part of that subscription service.
And by the way, if you want to be a part of the board, it is one of the least expensive for the biggest gain that you will ever get. And that is me speaking as a fan, not as an employee of Irish Breakdown. I'm telling you right now, you get the biggest bang for your buck being a member of the board. So the information,
Vince.
Well, I mean, look, I know I'm not getting a kickback on that comment.
Your Christmas bonus is going to be good this year.
But I'm just saying the information is like, I read it for information, okay? So I'm just telling you, it is really, really good information, and it is cheaper than any streaming service that you could sign up for. It's cheaper than a lot of it basically costs one Starbucks drink a month to be a part of all that information. So I say jump in if you haven't already. It is worth your time, everybody. So with that said, as they say when people are committing places, with all that said, let's jump into our topic today. There was a piece of information that was tweeted out today about the Notre Dame roster. Brian, I will let you take it from there. We do have an injury that is going to be a season-long injury, and that is disappointing. But we must talk.
It's funny. I actually got a poster on the message board hit me up with a private message 2 days ago and told me, "Hey, I'm hearing that Mitchell Evans is injured and all that." And I said, "Oh, I appreciate the heads up." And so we kind of got wind of it. And of course, Notre Dame released it today that Mitchell Evans was going to be out for the foreseeable future because he broke his 5th metatarsal, I think is what it was. They said in the injury events. Wow. So I don't know if that's the big toe or the pinky toe.
It's on one of the ends. Yeah.
One of them, I believe.
I would imagine it's the pinky side.
I'm not a doctor, nor did I stay in a Holiday Inn last night, so I couldn't. Specific to the injury, I don't know. They did say that he should be back by the end of the year, so that's obviously encouraging. I just hope it's not one of those situations that is.
Google is amazing.
Well, the thing I'm going to say is I'm kind of past that now. Like whatever, it is what it is.
Yeah,
but Kevin Austin injured his foot, if you remember, around the same time, like June, July, and then they tried to rush him back and he broke it again. And Mitchell Evans has like 40 pounds on Kevin Austin. So hopefully they're able to be careful and get a situation where he re-breaks and then he's hindered for the spring. So when you look at this situation, Vince just said it is the long bone on the outside of the foot that connects to the small toe.
So basically, you're cutting. It affects when you're cutting and moving laterally. That is going to be it's going to have massive effect on that particular bone. So,
but it is the pinky toe.
Yeah, it's that side.
Toe. Yeah,
it's the outside. Yeah.
So Vince, he's going to be out for several months, and this shakes up the tight end depth chart. And I know a lot of people say, "Well, I'm not worried about tight end depth chart," and I am. And just let me explain, because I do think this has an impact. Number one is,
Sure.
I think Mitchell Evans is a good football player, much better than I thought he was going to be. I mean, I think he was my lowest ranked player in the 2022-21 class. And, he had some upside and some tools to work with and all that, but he was a kid that played quarterback as a senior in high school.
Right.
Right.
Good
And he was a
point.
big, tall, long kid. I thought, maybe he'll help him out. And I thought he had a shot down the road to help. And much like Joe Alden, that's also partly what that 2021 class was so good, is some of the guys that I thought were projects were like ready to play right away. And Mitchell Evans, obviously some injuries stepped in and allowed him to get more playing time in the fall, but he started impressing last spring, Vince. If you remember, he was a guy that kind of stood out in some of the practices that we heard about. He had 2 impressive catches in the blue gold game. He caught a 4th down pass from Drew Pine, if you remember, a diving 4th. I thought that was him that caught that 4th down diving pass. Also caught a corner route from Tyler Buchner in that game. Really impressed with his athleticism. And of course came out and earned playing time this year, even before a lot of the injuries sank in. So, I think that, yes, tight end depth is good, but anytime you lose a guy, it's like, okay, now you're like, okay, running back depth chart, they're fine when Logan Diggs got hurt, but then Jadarian Price got hurt, and now, you know what I mean? So, like, you've got to be careful that the first one starts, and then now all of a sudden you're in a different situation, because the other thing to consider is Kevin Bauman has struggled to stay healthy in his career.
Right.
Eli Raridan and Kane Barong are both coming off of knee injuries that required surgery to replace. So, assuming everyone else is healthy,
Right,
Notre Dame's tight end depth chart will be fine. But, there's guys coming back from injury that is a question mark. And I don't think just because, like, look, I'm guilty of this. I did not have Mitchell Evans ranked very high coming out of high school. I didn't understand, honestly, why Notre Dame signed him. To be completely honest with you, I didn't understand why they signed him. And he's been better than I expected. He's been a good football player. And much earlier than I expected. So anytime you lose a kid that was expected to be a part of your rotation, that is a loss, even if you have other guys that are there, because what you want to have happen is for a guy like Eli Raridan or Holden Stace or Kane Barong to pass up Mitchell Evans because they beat him out.
Correct.
Not because he got hurt. And that's the situation. So, and even if they beat him out, I'd still want a healthy Mitchell Evans as part of my football team. He's 6'5", he's 250, he's filled out. He looked a lot different this spring than he did last fall. Still has a lot of room to build onto that body. And fortunately, the timing of it stinks where it could cost him this season, but it's still early in his career and he's still evolving and those type of things. So it's unfortunate for Mitchell Evans, Vince, but I'm just not quite so ready to just completely dismiss this as no big deal when you consider, and we'll talk about what's there, but I just can't quickly dismiss it when it's so, when there are the other question marks about Bauman and Raridan and Kane Barong with their own injuries last year.
And that's the biggest thing for me, is you've got guys coming off of injuries. Now, we anticipate that they're going to be healthy once the season starts, but that doesn't mean they won't re-injure or injure something else or whatever. It's still a question mark. And when you're talking about all these guys that are coming off of injury, if you exclude the walk-ons, right? Because there's 9 guys listed at tight end on the roster, okay? 4 of those guys are walk-ons, okay? So if I'm not mistaken, is Selna a walk-on?
They have 6 scholarship tight ends. Mayer, Bauman, Barong, Evans, Stace, and Raridan.
Stace, yeah. I'm sorry. Yep. I accidentally lumped him
does
in.
That give them?
So there's
10
3.
or 9?
There's 3 walk-ons. There's 3 walk-ons. So that's my fault.
Vince has already yanked Holden Stace's scholarship.
That was an accident. I was scribbling over here quickly, and that was an accident. But my point still stands that of the 5 guys that you anticipate are going to be healthy going into the season, what is it? 3 guys are coming off injury.
Right.
Does that sound right? So
yeah, because Raridan hurt his knee and needed surgery in December. He hurt his knee in December.
Right.
Kane Barong hurt himself in late October.
Right.
So he hurt his knee in late October. That required surgery. And Kevin Bauman's coming off of an injury. So we were told he hurt his knee, hurt his meniscus in the spring game, because remember, he got injured in the spring game. Ended up not being that serious, and he's fine. He's good to go. But it's just indicative of the fact that he's a kid that struggled to stay healthy
Right.
throughout his career.
Absolutely. Yes.
So that's kind of
So
been the issue.
you're looking at Holden Stays and Michael Mayer that have not been injured yet in their college career.
Right.
And Holden Stays is obviously.
Oh, Michael Mayer missed a game last year.
Well, that's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah,
so
he got hurt against Cincinnati, played through it, but then missed the Virginia. He tried, but he went through warmups, but it was obvious halfway through warmups he wasn't going to be able to play.
So, I mean, you're looking at a depth chart that has been compromised by injuries in the past. It's not like we're making them up and we're hoping that they don't get injured. These guys have all had injuries, and that it's concerning. I mean, I'm not worried, but it's still a concern that you have to talk about. Look, if all five of those guys are healthy, then beautiful.
Should be good.
And then they're great.
But the thing is, like, to your point, Vince, it's like if nothing else happens, they're good.
Yes.
Right. But they're even better with those five guys healthy and a healthy Mitchell Evans. And that's the thing that often gets lost because, Mitchell is going to do, I think, as he's evolved as a blocker and gotten bigger and filled out.
Sure.
He adds an element that, you're not going to ask Kane Barong to necessarily do what you were going to ask Mitchell Evans to do.
Right.
You're probably not going to ask Eli Raridan to do the things you're going to ask Mitchell Evans to do. And I think that's the part we're not talking about enough.
Right. Exactly.
Is, Mitchell Evans is the second biggest tight end on the roster from a weight standpoint.
Right.
Kevin Bauman's a guy that's a solid blocker, but he's not Brock Wright. Like Kevin Bauman may look like Brock Wright, but he's not Brock Wright. He's not that kind of blocker yet. He's got to prove himself. So, what Mitchell Evans brought you was a big-bodied kid that was getting stronger and could play as more of an inline attached guy. And I don't know that the other tight ends necessarily bring that to the table right now. So it's not just as easy saying, "Oh, plug in another tight end," because not all the other tight ends bring the same skill set to the table or would play the same role. It's kind of like if Jadarian Price and Logan Diggs were still healthy, and let's say Audric Estime got hurt, it'd be easy to say, hey, no big deal. They got these guys and these guys, but who else does what Audric Estime does?
Exactly.
And that's the thing to look at is like, yes, they have a lot of other tight ends, but who are the tight ends that are going to fill the specific, number 2 blocking tight end role that Mitchell Evans was going to bring to the table? I think that's a much more legitimate question, Vince, that requires a bit more than just, they're fine.
Right.
So what are the options, right? One is try to fit somebody else into that role.
Right.
That's an option. And that would be, Kevin Bauman, I think, potentially.
Yeah.
And Kane Barong, I'm curious how he's going to do as a blocker this year because he had great blocking film in high school, but he was 220 pounds.
Right. And he's only up to 235 on the roster.
He's up to over 240 in real life. On the roster, you are 100% correct. But just he's last I was told it was like 242 or something like that. Now, let's see if he can keep that on during fall camp. Right. I mean, Vince, you and I both know your weight of what you were the day you started fall camp was never the same as what your weight was when fall camp.
Especially if we get one of those August heat waves, you know what I mean, that are almost inevitable. Like you sweat that weight right off, man, and it is so hard to keep it off. I mean, keep it on. Excuse me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny how when you're young, it's impossible to keep weight on. Now it's impossible to take it off. Cruel joke by God.
Preaching to the choir on that one, brother.
Very cruel joke. Yes, we're trying to literally walk it off in the mornings now. But anyway, so I think, can Kane Barong, if he is over 240, if he can hold that weight, he's a very strong kid. Perhaps Kane could fill that role. But again, 240 is still not huge for a tight end.
Sure.
But he is a strong kid. I actually was told that I have a source that actually sent me some of the summer workout numbers, and Kane Barong actually put up 225 the same amount of times as Michael Mayer.
Okay.
So he's a strong kid, but again, there's weight room strength and then there's football strength. And again, we're talking about a kid that just now got cleared off of the knee injury he suffered in October.
Right.
So I think Bauman potentially could be that guy. And I think Barong, even though he doesn't necessarily he's not the same kind of guy as Mitchell Evans. He's a different kind of kid. I wonder, could you utilize him in a way that allows him to serve as a blocker at times?
Sure.
I'm very curious about that. So that to me is the guy that has the most I don't want to say opportunity, because I hate looking at another player's injury and using it to make it sound like,
There's an
oh, this is a
opportunity
great
for somebody
opportunity
else,
for
yeah.
so and so, because the reality is the opportunity is now there because of the injury.
Well,
And that's just the reality of football.
And there's still the next man up mentality. I mean,
Right.
that still exists, and it has to
Right.
exist no matter what. I mean, you coach football, that mentality has to exist. I mean, if it doesn't, you're in trouble, right? Because injuries happen. It's football, it's contact sport,
Right?
And you have to anticipate injuries. So it is an opportunity. I mean, we don't want to frame it as that because of an injury, but it is an opportunity for one of these guys to step up.
That I just want to be clear, when we talk about it's an opportunity, it's not like a yay opportunity for Kane Barong, but the reality is there is an opening there, and Kane Barong is a guy that is now going to get more reps and more of an opportunity, in my opinion, to fill that specific niche role, where as before he was not only battling there, but he was also battling with Eli Raridan and Kevin Bauman for a pass catcher role as well. So that's going to be part of this as to what.
I'm interested. So we all remember Tommy Tremble's role. He's kind of that H-back coming across the formation, kicking out the end, a lot of that, sometimes leading up through the hole, depending on the play call, right? This year, they've got guys listed as a fullback. So I'm wondering if they're still going to use the tight end in that role, or are they going to use a fullback in that role? You know what I mean? Like,
I think
are there less opportunities for the tight ends, or do they need that skill set, or have they kind of shifted that to kind of the fullback? But now the fullbacks are all walk-ons too. So I mean, that is understood. So I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, I think that there's a potential for that role to be filled by a Kane Barong, to be filled by a Kevin Bauman potentially, and then Holden Stace also potentially part of that conversation as well. So, but again, that role was kind of created for Tommy Tremble. It's not necessarily a role that they didn't have that role this year
that they want to fill in the offense in order to be successful.
And I think the fullback is kind of to do that role. I think they used Tommy Tremble to do that because of the fact that he was so good at it. And like I said, we did not see that role replicated last year. I think, and that's partly why the fullback was created. Now, again, in spring, they needed that because Barong was out. They didn't have Stace and Raridan. So, you kind of needed to invent that role a little bit with the fullback position. And, Davis Sherwood's this is the thing. We talk about walk-on, but as I've said this before, I coach at the FCS level. I coach at a 1AA school that plays some D1 teams. We didn't the year I was there. We played in Ivy and place like that, but we didn't play Duquesne is traveling out to see Hawaii. They've played TCU in recent years. Right. And I'm just telling you, some of the kids that are walk-ons in Notre Dame would have been top of the board recruits.
Prize recruits. Absolutely.
Yeah. Connor Radigan, I would have been yeah, please let me get Connor Radigan. You know what I mean? Please let me get Matt Salerno. Those cats could be role players for us early and then eventually grow into
a Justin Fisher from Mishawaka. That kid's an athlete, absolutely.
And definitely at the Division III level, they'd have been stars.
Yeah, right.
I had two receivers that spent time in the NFL at Duquesne. Connor Radigan would have been in my rotation.
Right.
I mean, no question. He'd have been in my rotation. And then when they left, potentially stepped into a starting role at the Division III level, he's an All-American.
Right.
Right. And that's the thing people have to understand. David Sherwood's a similar example. If David Sherwood wanted to be a starter, he could have gone to the FCS level or something like that and been a good football player. So these aren't they're
not bums.
These aren't rich kids who suck at football, whose parents bought their way onto the football team. You know what I mean? These are kids that can play.
Yeah.
To some degree. So I think that's why that role exists. But I still think you ideally want to have the more talented player on the field, if possible, if it's a base offense role. It's one thing if it's 3rd and 1.
Sure.
But if this is going to be sort of like a base offense like it was used with Tommy Tremble in 2020, you'd like to have a bigger, stronger, faster, more athletic player there if you can. And so I think that's where another area where Kane Barong is ideally suited for that role.
Yeah.
The question is can he also then maybe take on some of the number 2 blocking tight end role, or will it be Kevin Bauman? I think those are the questions, because I don't see Eli Raridan at this stage of his career, or Holden Stace at this stage of their career, as true freshmen, as 18-year-olds. Are they going to have they're not stepping onto campus with the same body that Michael Mayer stepped foot on campus.
Sure.
They're different type of athletes. Michael Mayer showed up as a freshman as a grown man ready to play big time football.
That's a fact. Yeah.
He's the anomaly.
Right.
Right. It's kind of like holding freshmen to the standard of Trevor Lawrence. guys just don't show up like that all the time. They're unique, and that's what made Michael Mayer unique, and why he has shattered. He shattered freshman tight end records. Now last year he shattered individual seats because he is a unique player.
He's a unicorn.
So the other thing too, Vince, is I think this almost puts in a situation where one of the freshmen is going to have to play.
Okay.
Here's the good news. So Eli Raridan is running and moving around, and from what I've been told, the things he is doing, and I don't know yet to the extent in which he's allowed to do things, but he has been one player that has been constantly mentioned by others to me when talking about who is looking good this summer. And I don't do a lot of that early on because I kind of like to let the whole spring play out and the whole summer play out before I get intel. I hate because you always have that guy that looks great the first week and then, he fades. So I like waiting until later.
Oh yeah.
But that is a guy that Eli Raridan, as people said, boy, that guy's different.
Well, he was different. He was different before he got injured, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he was the kid that was throwing down dunks and was
right.
going coast to coast in basketball games. And like that kid's an athlete, right? And I was super excited. I'm still super excited about him, but coming off of that injury, it's a major injury, right? And so he's been on the shelf for a while. It's going to take a little bit of time to work his way back. But with the athleticism that I saw on film of him, I see him coming back, and I'm happy to hear that he's moving around, he's doing things, and then hopefully for, they're going to start camping, like 3 weeks? So he's got 3 weeks to kind of get himself together, and then they kind of ease into 2 days anyway into fall camp. So he's going to have opportunities to get himself where he needs to be. So by the time the season starts, I think he'll at least be an option for them. And what a great option if he's 100%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that you mentioned he was unique before. The fact that he is looking that way again now is kind of the encouraging thing for me, that it looks like the explosiveness is back and those type of things.
That's really good to hear.
Yeah.
You worry about that kind of thing,
especially how late his knee injury was.
Yeah, absolutely.
And same thing with like Kane Barong. He's a guy that came back and, kind of came back. He got hurt late. He's going to be back, but how healthy is he going to be?
Sure.
How full strength? What's his conditioning going to be? All those type of things are things. And Ryan Anders says, will the 4 tight end set make an appearance again in 2022? I'm going to predict no.
Okay.
Because I think what we'll see is a 3 tight end set with a fullback is what I think we'll see. And there's 3 kids that are on the roster as fullbacks, right, Vince? I believe.
Yes, that's correct.
And I think I'm trying to remember the other kid's name. Somebody mentioned his name in the chat.
I've got him. It's Justin Fisher, the incoming freshman from Mishawaka. It's
David. You said is a good football player.
He's a very good football player. Davis Shearwood is listed, and then Barrett Liebertritt.
Yeah.
So those are the 3 guys, and then the other 2 are true sophomores. Okay. So they're young guys actually as well, which is interesting.
Right. And then I think there's some tight ends that maybe could fill that role as well. So we'll have to look at those.
Yeah, somebody in the chat mentioned Andrew Yanushak. He's a sophomore as well. He's listed as a tight end with a 30 number. So I mean, he can easily transition to being a fullback.
Right, and he's listed at 6'2", 233. So that's much more fullback size than it is tight end size.
And he's the smallest tight end on the roster right now. Right. So yes, he could very easily make that transition.
Yeah. All right, Vince. So I think that's going to do it for the tight end conversation. Obviously there's a lot of options there, a lot of talent, but it's not just easy. It's not just plug and play because I don't know who that next guy is that fits the same role that Mitchell Evans is going to play. That's what you love about college football, right? So it's either you evolve your offense to where you don't need that role as much. Somebody else steps into that role and takes it over and says, hey, next man and all that. But I do think Notre Dame is going to have plenty of options at tight end. It just may not look like it would have looked if Mitchell Evans was going to be healthy. But anytime you lose a good football player from your roster, I don't care what your depth chart looks like, it is a loss.
Yes.
It is a loss. And Mitchell Evans was a kid that I had somebody at Notre Dame, Vince, tell me that he thinks he's a day 2 draft pick. Not now, but
but by the time he gets out,
right.
Wow,
could be a day 2 draft pick.
Good, that's great.
So basically, you're telling me he's a Tommy Tremble. I still believe Brock Wright would have been drafted higher if Brock would have not had to sit behind.
If he had to play more, he got to play more.
A couple second round picks.
I mean, he was either the starter or the second tight end. his rookie or is his rookie year in the
His first
NFL?
year, yeah.
I mean,
he started several games, as an
So,
undrafted free agent.
just saying. I
And
mean,
he's only undrafted because he sat behind Cole Kmet,
Right.
Tommy Tremble, and Alize Mack his whole career.
right. He was at
So,
tight end U, and
who were
that's
all
difficult.
drafted.
Yeah, right,
Right.
exactly. And he's
Right.
starting in the NFL. So
Right.
there you go. Speaks
So
to the
Vince,
depth.
we're going to move on to quarterback. Before we do, remember, folks, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and share this podcast. Definitely. So that's going to do it for the tight end. Next, we are going to talk about quarterback.
Yes, and one specific quarterback today. We're going to talk about Tyler Buchner. And we were talking on our walk this morning about Tyler and what he brings to the table and some things like that. And I actually said to you, I was like, I feel like we need to remind people who he is and what he brings to the table, because it's been all about Dante Moore and it's been about CJ Carr.
Understandably.
And I get it. Recruiting, and it's the off season, and it's
especially
exciting.
When there's nothing of us to watch of Tyler Buchner.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's not like there's a summer league that we get a chance to watch.
And he wasn't in the spring game.
Right.
And somebody made the point the other day that, okay, if Tyler was in the spring game and even performed moderately well, we're not having a lot of these discussions about what he's going to be able to do during the season. And I agree with that completely. The only story we got was that he was injured.
Right.
And that just leads to wild speculation and everything else. And so I felt like we needed to remind people about who Tyler Buchner was and what he brings to the table, man.
But also in a way that we're also going to discuss some of the concerns that there are that are legitimate. And I think some of the concerns people have are just, to me, just illegitimate. They're just that's nonsense, right?
Right.
Like, but let's discuss. We'll talk about what we like, but let's discuss, I think, kind of why I think many of the doubters it's one thing to say, hey, he's got to prove it. We should all have that mindset. Like,
absolutely.
Vince and I are going to talk, and we're going to kind of predict a little bit what we think we're going to see from Tyler Buchner. Right? That's a projection based on his talent. He has to show us that he's that guy. I mean, there's no doubt. We're not sitting there saying, I'm betting my next 2 mortgages on Tyler Buchner being a runner-up for the Heisman Trophy this year, right? Like, that's not what we're doing. But what we are doing is saying, hey, look, this is why we're excited about it. But we will also address some of the reasons that as a first-year starter, what are the potential pitfalls it could have as a young player?
Right.
And so we'll get to that here in a second too, Vince. But first, I think I want to address sort of where a lot of this comes from. And I think it begins even way before what you just mentioned, which is the fact that we didn't see him in the blue gold game. I think that's kind of like, folks, how many times do I have to tell you spring games don't matter?
No.
So if Tyler Buchner went out in the spring game and lit the world on fire, it would not predict future success, just like him playing bad. Because I was thinking about this yesterday. I was talking to Sean Davis, and I was like, this whole quarterback thing reminds me so much of 2015. And I remember going into 2015, and and Buchner is now Deshaun Kaiser. Now, the difference is back then, Deshaun Kaiser was the backup.
Correct.
And the narrative was, if Malik goes down, they're in trouble.
Right.
Remember how many times me and Lou talked about this on the BGI podcast back in the day, Vince?
And it was because of how poorly he played in the spring game. That's what everybody had to go off of, right?
And it was all, if Malik gets hurt, they're screwed. And I was like, they're going to be fine. And I said this to me, they're going to be fine. They're going to be fine because I don't care about a spring game. I know this kid can flat out play, and he's got talent around him. And now the difference in this discussion, why I think it's even amplified more, is Tyler's expected to be the starter, not the backup like Deshaun Kaiser was expected to be in 2015. Both redshirt freshmen, both talented. Deshaun played poorly in the spring game. Tyler didn't even play in the spring game.
Right.
So I think that's part of it. But I think this goes way back to before. And to answer that one question, he sprained his ankle walking down the steps. That's all it was. If it happened the week before the Ohio State game, he'd have played.
Exactly. And that's the key.
So
I 100% believe he would have played. You tape it up. You go. And I believe he would have played.
Give him a shot. And
if it was the middle of the season or whatever, he's playing. But it's a spring game, and it doesn't matter. So he didn't play, and I have no problem with that, whatever. But it allows for rampant speculation, right? And somebody else asked, does the way he hurt himself bother you? No, it doesn't.
It bothers me if I have never done that before.
Right.
I have done that before.
I mean, if people say they haven't, I mean, look, people trip up or down the stairs all the time.
Yeah.
Okay. It happens. It just happens.
I work in my basement, and I had a plate of food one day that ended up on my stairs because I missed a step, and
It just is what it is, man.
yeah. So, but I think the whole concern about Tyler we have to trace this back to a year ago.
Okay.
Because you and I have taken on completely different roles in the Tyler Buchner conversation. A year ago, it was like, people, pump the flipping brakes.
It was.
Right? Like, let's not hype up Tyler Buchner to be Trevor Lawrence, because that's now, and this was what I said when Trevor had the year. I said he's going to ruin every expectation for freshman quarterbacks for the next decade, because we're all going to expect your quote unquote 5-star freshman quarterback to be Trevor Lawrence now. Trevor Lawrence wasn't a 5-star. Trevor Lawrence was a generational talent. Correct. He was a unicorn, much like Michael Mayer. Like, I'm not going to expect Eli Raritan to come in and be Michael Mayer. It's an unfair expectation. He may end up being Michael Mayer when his career's over, but some guys just come in and they're on a different level, right?
Yep.
And so that's kind of where I'm coming from. And so with Tyler last year, it was he's going to be the starter. He's going to beat Jack out. Jack's this, Jack's that. Drew Pine's this, Drew Pine's that. Tyler's going to be the guy. You got to play him. Look how well he did in the blue gold game, right? Because led the offense with their only touchdown, and it was like against the defense filled mostly of walk-ons, if we're being honest. Right. And backups. And it was just like, let's pump the brakes. But we failed at getting people to have realistic expectations for Tyler Buchner last year.
And I mean, the whole time, what were we saying? What did we want to see during the 21 season?
Well, we wanted to see exactly what he did. The problem is most people looked at it here. And so then that was the problem. There was an expectation that he was going to be the starter. Even if it wasn't in the opener, he was eventually going to take over as the starter.
Right.
He didn't do that.
Right.
And then so what happened is to double up on that, the role they used him for was very narrow and specific. And so he was a game changer. He was the guy that came in and brought a tempo. So what was the first play that Tyler Buchner of his career? It was against Toledo, and he pulls it from his own end zone and runs for like 30 yards. Right, that's the first play of his career.
And let the yapping begin.
Yeah, right. And then I think that game too, didn't he hit a bomb that game too?
I think so.
So it's like, okay, he's that guy. But Notre Dame stuck to the role, and the role was that of you're going to come in, you're going to be a change of pace player. You're not going to come in, run the whole offense. You are going to have a very limited scope. What you also have to remember is technically Drew Pine was the backup quarterback last year.
He got backup quarterback reps,
which meant Tyler was not getting. Usually it's like a 60-40 split.
Right.
Sometimes it may be 70-30. Your starter gets 60 to 70% of the practice reps, and those are like team 7-on-7, stuff like that. And then your backup will get 30 to 40%. That's usually when it's two guys. The problem is they were splitting the reps between Drew and Tyler.
Right.
So neither of them were getting the same amount of backup reps that you normally get. That was especially problematic for Tyler, who was coming off a year in which he did not play as a senior in high school. And when we say not play, it's not that he was injured and on the sidelines, but at practice and the film, they didn't even have a season.
Right.
The season was completely canceled.
Just nothing.
Because of COVID. And so, for me with Tyler, it was unrealistic expectations. And then the fact that Notre Dame used him because their thought was, he's too talented not to have a role, but we're not going to bring him in, which is what we wanted.
Yes.
But they're not going to bring him in and say, hey, go run the offense. And he wasn't doing that week after week after week. Now, he wasn't just running power read and quarterback read. He was running but it was a much more limited package.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. And that's why when obviously part of it, he has the hamstring injury. So then Drew Pine goes in and he leads the offense and these type of things. But Drew was the backup quarterback and not Tyler. But Tyler would get thrown into the game. And I thought at times in times was like, why are they putting him in the game right now?
Right, exactly.
Like the offense is moving. Don't.
Yeah, the timing of those things was not great in my opinion, but
and then it is what it is. But anyway, so I think those two things more than anything combined to it. And then there was the Virginia Tech game. And the reality is Tyler had some bad throws in the second half of that game. What bothers me is that some people are completely unwilling to address the fact that he did have some bad throws. He got baited into a pick six in that game.
Because that's what you do to a true freshman who doesn't have a ton of,
Right.
He got baited by a veteran player.
Right. So we need to be able to address that and say those are areas he's going to get better at, and we'll address those. The problem, however, is that a lot of people who have a negative view of Tyler now, and they're just grabbing onto it for some reason, refuse to do anything other than look at those plays. Now, Tyler still made some plays in the second half, but it was Virginia Tech was able to go in at halftime, make some adjustments, start throwing some stuff at him that they were not throwing at Jack Cohn because they knew this kid, there's no way this kid is ready to do all this. But what those people will also do is completely dismiss what he did in the first half.
Yeah.
And that was I think it was like 8 of 10, something like that, 8 of 14, 8 of 12, 8 of 12 or something like that for like 104 yards, turned a 10-0 deficit into a 14-10 halftime lead. Gorgeous throw to Kevin Austin deep, has a great read to Avery Davis, hits a couple really nice sideline throws to Kyron Williams and Avery Davis, and then leads them to 2 touchdowns. So on the road with a Virginia Tech crowd going crazy because they had a 10-0 lead on Notre Dame.
Right.
He comes in and says, I got this.
Right.
Second half, he didn't have that. They threw more at him. His package was limited.
Great adjustments, by the way.
Very good adjustments.
I mean, great adjustments.
Yeah. And they forced him into some mistakes. And again, they didn't protect him in the second half. I mean, off O-line wise, that was a big issue in the second half as well, as Tyler was not getting a lot of time to throw. So Jack Cohn comes off the bench, leads him to a victory, and the rest is history. And I still feel like because Tyler stayed in that role the rest of the year, that a narrative has been created that he can't throw.
Right.
We read the garbage analysis of Pro Football Focus. It's just so bad. But you hear from a lot of Notre Dame fans too. It's maybe and I think a lot of it maybe is some of the fans who don't follow recruiting. There's a lot of fans that just don't follow recruiting other than just looking at who they signed, right? And they didn't see Tyler play. They're not aware. Like everybody said, well, he wasn't that great of a passer in high school. Threw for 4,474 yards and 58 touchdowns. Well, against bad level of competition. I don't care what level of competition it was.
Still got to throw it and still got to catch it. Still got to make plays.
Exactly. And that was the thing. You watch some of his game film, and he had some throws where dudes weren't catching it. His numbers should have even been even better. So for me, Vince, it was one of those things where I think there was unrealistic expectations for what he would be last year, and then not properly understanding why he played the way he did. Well, he's a runner, not a passer. That's what he was last year because that's what they asked him to do. That's what they asked him to do. And yes, he had some bad throws last year, as a lot of freshmen do. Remind you that C.J. Stroud threw a grand total of 0 passes as a freshman at Ohio State. Bryce Young completed passes at a much lower rate, well, not much lower, by over a percentage lower than Tyler Buchner did as a freshman, and did not complete as many passes, though, for many yards. And Tyler had 6 touchdowns combined compared to 1 for Bryce Young as a true freshman. So he was actually given more opportunities to play in environments than what those guys were given in their freshman years. So I think that the narrative, Vince, is the one. It's one thing to be able to break film down of a guy, but it's another thing to crush narratives because those really don't get changed until a guy goes out and shows it. Yeah. And that's fair.
I get that. That's fine.
I think we should all say, hey, he's got to show me. But some of the stuff is just that I feel like Vince has just kind of gotten completely out of hand.
I guess my biggest issue are the people that, and I'll say it on both sides. It's the people that take just the negative and they roll with it, or it's the people that just take the positive and roll with that. Mm-hmm. There are 2 sides to this. And if you're going to be an analyst, or if you're going to be fair to the kid, you got to take both sides of it. And you've got to use that in your analysis of who it is and what you, and then you can make a logical assumption about what he's going to be moving forward. So you have to take what he did at Notre Dame, his true freshman year, everything that you just outlined about how he was prepared for that role, what they asked him to do, both within that role and outside that role, frankly. They asked him to do some stuff that he didn't really practice a whole lot, right? Or at least not enough. And he didn't do very well at that, okay? So you have to take all of that, and then you also have to take what was the last thing that he did when he was a starter on his team. I think that's important. When he had the whole playbook to his disposal, you know what I mean? When he was the leader of the team. That wasn't his role last year. It's not what he was asked to do, right? He's now going to be the leader of the offense. He's going to be the starting quarterback, okay? At least that we believe that that's what's going to happen. And that's different than being the package quarterback. It's just different.
Right.
And so you have to take all of that and you throw it in the hopper, and then you make an informed opinion about who he is and who he's going to be. What you come up with as your conclusion, okay, but you've got to take it all. You can't just latch on to things here and there and make your opinion. That's what I don't like.
Yeah, because I think especially when you're doing it in regards to, well, look what he did as a freshman.
Right.
Because you're not it's like you have to understand the role he was being asked to play.
Exactly.
And that's where I think a lot of this was created. I think so. It's the unfair expectations plus the fact that they're because I have a buddy like this, and he's a really good football guy, like really good football guy. But he'll see a kid, like he'll look at a recruit, and the kid plays stand-up edge rusher. And he'll be like, yeah, but I don't know if the kid can play Mike linebacker. I'm like, well, what do you mean? He goes, yeah. He goes, but for him, he can only evaluate the kid for what the kid has done.
Right.
He can't then project him to playing something else. And so, I think that's kind of the thing that some people have too. Is like, this is all I've seen him do. I didn't see him play in high school. I've only seen him do this. And so that's all I think he can do. So it's one thing to it's not that he can't project, but he just assumes that the kid can't do it because it's like, well, why else would the high school coach use him like that? I'm like, well, because that's what they needed him to do in high school, right? It's
high school is, man, you put your best players at the most influential spots. That's what you do. You know,
I mean, we saw that with Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah. I mean, in high school as well. So when I look at it, Vince, I think that's where I'm at. But I do think there are some legitimate things that we can discuss about what are the potential pitfalls to Tyler Buchner having a breakout season, because I think he's going to have a breakout year. I'm just to say it right now. I think he's going to have a break. I think by the end of the year, a lot of people are going to be talking about Tyler Buchner.
Yeah,
completely. Heck, I think by the end of September, people are going to be talking about Tyler Buchner. But definitely by the end of the year, he's going to be a big name, in my opinion, because of the potential that the production he has this year, and then, of course, projecting him into future seasons.
Right.
Because I think he's going to be a very good football player this season. However, there are some legitimate things that we can discuss to say, hey, look, this is a bit of a concern for me. And we'll bring up some film of him playing when we get into the reasons why we're predicting a bit of a breakout for him. Number one, obviously, I mean, we can't dismiss the health piece. Like, we can sit there and say, like there was a question, like somebody said, I'm trying to find it down here. Brian Demo says, how does Tyler hurt himself bother anyone? And I get that, but I do think that I'm with you on that, Brian. But I do think the fact that we shouldn't worry about how he got hurt. Those things happen.
Sure. Right.
Just like Jarrett Patterson got hurt lifting weights. I mean, stuff happens.
Right.
Right. But we also, when you consider he did miss an entire season, sophomore season because of an injury, we can't just dismiss and act like injuries aren't an issue.
Sure.
Right. That is an issue. He's got to prove that he can stay healthy. I'm not as concerned about, because like last year he had a hamstring injury. I fully believe that he didn't play the next game against Wisconsin because, again, that was not the role he was being asked to do, was as a runner. You're not going to put a guy with a tight hamstring or an injured hamstring in the game as a runner. What they would do if he's the starter and he hurts his hamstring is sit him in the pocket.
Yeah.
And go about it that way. So again, you're not going to play him in that role if that's all you're asking him to do. So, but I do think he has to prove that he can play a full season. I mean, I think that's fair. I think that's a fair thing to bring up
too, because if you look at his whole career,
right,
his whole football playing career, was he the starter as a freshman? I know he played as a freshman.
He played a bunch. I don't know if he started the whole season, but he played a bunch as a freshman.
We'll call it a partial starter, whatever. He played as a freshman. He was out his entire sophomore year due to injury. He played his whole junior year. Obviously, he didn't get hurt his senior year because he didn't play. But then his freshman year, he had a hamstring issue, and then he twisted his ankle. Mm-hmm. Okay. People are going to complain about his injury history. I will just say, yeah, okay. He's got to prove that to me. That's fine. There's not a lot you can push back on because those are facts on paper, right? He had issues with injuries.
Right.
Okay. That's fine. He hasn't had a major injury since his sophomore year in high school. So that's been 4 years. So I will say that. If we're talking massive injuries, right? I mean, he had a little bit of a hamstring, came back from it. He twisted his ankle, probably could have played if it was a real game. So those are more you're hurt, you're not injured.
Because he didn't miss his senior season because of an injury.
Absolutely.
He missed it because the state of California canceled football for the fall. They didn't play again until the spring, but by the time the spring came around, he was at Notre Dame.
Right.
And so I wonder if some people think maybe he missed that year. Like, he only played 1 year of high school football. He must have been injury prone. No.
Yeah,
it was
played his freshman year. He played his junior year. Senior year didn't happen because he was at Notre Dame when they played the limited spring schedule. Right. So
he literally got hurt in the opener as a sophomore.
Right.
The season opener.
Right.
So I think he's got to prove he can stay healthy. And then he also has to prove, Vince, that he can handle the rigors of an entire season. I do think that is something also that he has to show. He has to show that he can, and this is true of any young player, can he go through a 12-game season and stay fresh and productive and those type of things? But that's true for all young players.
Absolutely.
That's true for Lorenzo Styles. That's true for a lot of guys.
Absolutely.
That's true for Blake Fisher. And that's a fair thing too. The other part is I do think he has to be more consistent as a passer. I think that's fair to say.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think where the difference would be is we're coming from a completely different place of other people in regards to what the baseline is. Like, I think there's some people that think he's 2017 Brandon Wimbush. He's not. I think he'll be better than that this year, much less moving forward. He is a run-throw quarterback, but somebody asked me, why did Tommy Reece recruit Tyler Buchner if he prefers drop-back quarterbacks? Because Notre Dame didn't know he was going to be this dynamic of a runner when they landed him. They landed him after his freshman year. Like, he didn't play in the 2019 season was after he committed.
Right.
He committed. Notre Dame took a chance on Tyler Buchner because of how he got his offer. For those you don't know, actually, he was I think it's right going into his sophomore year is when he committed to Notre Dame, I believe. But he was actually a kid that came to Notre Dame's camp and lit it up. I remember talking to Notre Dame coaches after, they're like, "Yo, you got to hear that this kid that we had, man, this kid looked phenomenal." Like,
that was between his freshman and sophomore year.
I believe so, yes. Yeah. And he just lit it up as a passer. Now, they knew he was athletic because he actually committed to Michigan as an did he commit to Michigan? I think he committed to Michigan as an 8th grader to play lacrosse.
Okay.
He was considered one of the better lacrosse person on the entire West Coast as a young kid. So they knew he was athletic, but they recruited him because of his ability to sit back and throw the football. That's why Notre Dame went after him. So I think our baseline is going to be different.
People don't know that story.
And so, which is fine. I get it.
That's what I'm saying. Like, it's good that you're getting it out there because there's a lot
Not everybody follows recruiting, and that's totally okay.
Absolutely. But there's a lot of people that think he's just a runner first. And a passer off of the run, which is not the case.
He's not what Brandon Wimbush was. Now, Brandon didn't come to Notre Dame that way either. He was kind of developed that way. But that's not who Tyler is. Yes, Tyler's got some throwing motion stuff that can lead him to misses. Sometimes he goes too quickly through the throwing zone and he kind of short arms it, Vince, and the ball just doesn't get there accurately. Those are things he's going to have to continue improving upon. He's going to have mistakes like that this year. He's going to have a play where he underthrows or throws it on the back hip when he should have thrown it in the front hip, or the front shoulder, and it's going to get picked off. It's going to happen. I promise you. He's going to speed his motion up too soon, and the ball's going to come out of his hand quick and sail, go right past his receiver and get picked off. That will probably happen this year.
Yeah, right.
The thing that Tyler has to do is limit those things and as the season goes on, not make those mistakes again. I think that is a fair thing that he has to prove this year. He has to prove, Vince, that he can effectively become a guy that can do damage. He's going to run around and make plays. He's going to make plays off script. He's going to be a dynamic runner, and that's all fine. But he has to prove to run this offense effectively. Tyler Buchner has to prove that he can sit in the pocket and beat you from the pocket.
Yes.
You're not beating Ohio State just because he ran. Now that may, if Notre Dame upsets Ohio State, I promise you there'll be a couple big runs or off script plays by Tyler Buchner. That would be a reason for that.
No doubt.
But they won't get to the point where they are going to outscore Ohio State because of that. There will also be things he has to do from the pocket. Same thing with Clemson, BYU, UNC. He's got to prove that he can consistently sit in the pocket, go through his reads and progressions, and we have a super chat about that here in a second, Vince.
Yeah,
but that is a thing that he is going to have to prove that he can do this year.
And I will also say that if he can't do that, right? If he struggles to sit in the pocket and make plays, go through his progressions, make plays from the pocket, it's going to be a repeat of 2019, 2020. as far as how defenses are going to play Notre Dame's offense. Okay, because during those years, no one was afraid that Notre Dame was going to be able to sit in the pocket and go through progressions and hit the open man, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They wanted to keep Ian Book in the pocket because they weren't afraid of him from the pocket. Okay. And so they would load the box. They would come after him to shut down the run game because they weren't afraid that he was going to hurt them through the air.
Yeah.
But he could hurt them with his legs, which he did.
Right. Scrambling.
Many times. But scrambling.
He wasn't the designed runner that Tyler is, but yes, on scrambles and movement, 100%.
That is how he hurt teams. There's no doubt about it. So they would load the box. They would keep him in if they wanted to keep him contained.
Stop the run, keep him in the pocket.
And that's how you beat Notre Dame in 19 and 20, period.
And 18. Right. That's what Clemson did.
Absolutely.
That's exactly what Clemson did.
That's exactly what they did. If Notre Dame's offense, now with Tyler Buchner, if he can sit in the pocket and he can pick apart defenses with his arm, that is forcing teams now to unload the box with now a better offensive line, a better run game than they had in 2020 or 2021, excuse me. Now that opens up the run game. Right. You've got the pass game. It just makes you so much more effective getting the ball out to who you need to get it out to. So he does have to prove that because it hasn't been proven by Notre Dame in a while.
If he is Brandon Wimbush 2.0, Notre Dame will be 10-2 this year at worst. They will. But I promise you they'll lose to Ohio State. And they'll lose one of BYU, Clemson, and USC. Him as a dynamic runner will beat a lot of teams. But what will happen is Notre Dame will be 10-2 or 11-1 if he's Brandon Wimbush 2.0. And then they will go into the postseason again, and they will lose either the first playoff game or a major bowl game.
Right.
Against somebody with an equal or better roster. And that's the reality. He's got to be able to say, hey, I'm going to sit back in the pocket and beat you. Now, maybe early in the season against Ohio State, he's not that guy. But he needs to be that guy by the time they get to BYU, and especially by the time Clemson comes.
And I think he needs to at least be a shadow of that guy in order to beat Ohio State. Right. I mean, he's going to have to be a he's going to have to do two things. He's going to have to throw the ball. He's going to have to run the ball. And if he's only one-dimensional, then they're going to struggle offensively. And if you can't score against Ohio State, you're not going to beat Ohio State.
Right.
So
now, of course, the scenario changes is they're not going to beat Ohio State because of Tyler Buchner in that scenario. That doesn't mean they may not force a couple turnovers. Chris Tyree takes a kickback for score,
right? The defense wins the game for you, essentially, right? That could definitely happen. I could see
so,
that.
Yes, Tyler Buchner needs to be a guy that can sit back and when teams take the running part away can hurt you in the pocket. That's going to be the key. One of the things I think I need to see too is I really need to see him, and I've said this before, Vince, I need to see that Tyler Buchner can stretch the field. Now, to me, I'm not talking about, we know he can do this. We know against cover one, he can throw a beautiful deep ball. He did it twice last year. I mean, and I'm not talking like one-on-ones or Austin. I mean, I'm talking about dropping it, diming it over top of the outside shoulder.
It's got a beautiful touch.
Yeah. I mean, so we know that. And he has great timing on the deep ball as well. We know he can throw the deep ball. And I'm trying to remember. I think the first one, I think it was against Toledo, wasn't it? Wasn't it, Vince? I'm looking at his numbers now. I believe it was. Let's see, passing numbers. Yeah, he went 3 for 3 for 78 yards and a touchdown. It may not have been Toledo, because I know against Toledo he had the 55-yard touchdown pass to Tyler Buchner. To Chris Tyree. I have to go back and look what the other game was. But anyway, the point is he can do that. But my thing is, can he run a play action and throw a post route over top of the safety? That I don't know. We just haven't seen him do it a ton. Now, there's some throws we're going to show on this highlight film where he throws the ball over 50 yards in the air.
Right.
But that's fine. That's high school. I need to see him do it at the college level. And so, because that's the other thing is if he's a 20 and in guy and he can throw the occasional one-on-one outside fade, that's fine, and the offense will be good. But again, what's the standard here, right? Like the standard isn't can Tyler Buchner lead you to 10-2? Yeah, you're going to have a better roster than minimum 9 teams on your schedule, if not 10. An argument can be made for 11. The only team that I would say top to bottom could make a case that they have a better roster is Ohio State. Now, I think position by position, I actually think Notre Dame has the edge if position groups against Ohio State. What a lot of Ohio State fans don't understand is that's just one way to look at it. And then they take it as you think Notre Dame's going to win by 50 because a lot of Ohio State fans, Archer, with all due respect, can't see past their nose.
Right.
right? And just don't understand things. So, but if you look at it, the gap, the matchups of where Ohio State has, that's where Ohio State has the better roster. Is they're strong in areas where Notre Dame isn't as strong. Right. They are really good in some areas where Notre Dame is not as good. And Notre Dame's issues on offense are kind of matched up against Ohio State's issues on defense. Right. What are we concerned about on Notre Dame offense? Okay, passing game, receiver stepping up. Well, that plays into Ohio State's concern. They're not great in the secondary, in my opinion. So, whereas on the other side of the ball, Notre Dame's secondary is a question mark. Ohio State's pass offense is the strength of the team.
Right.
And so that's why I say, your offense is going to have to play beyond that. So Ohio State's the one team I think that can argue their roster's better than Notre Dame's. I would say it is, top to bottom. However, after that, it's not a given to me that Clemson has a better roster. A lot of people say that. I don't think that they do. It's debatable, but I don't think that they do. And I definitely don't think USC has a better top to bottom roster than Notre Dame does. So then it gets down to Tyler Buchner can beat most of those teams. Because of the rest of the team around you is really good. But that's not the standard in Notre Dame.
It shouldn't be.
That's the standard we held Ian Book to. I don't care that Ian Book, went 30-0 in his career against teams that finished the year unranked. Don't care.
Right.
Good for you, Ian. Love it. Happy for you.
Yep. Enjoy the record. That's awesome.
No, he actually went 25-0. Excuse me. Because his final career number was 30-5, right? Basically, wasn't that his career record?
So. Yeah.
Something like that.
I remember the 30 number.
Right. Right. So he went 25-0 essentially against teams that finished unranked, because his record in his career against ranked opponents was 5-5. That was his record against ranked opponents.
Right.
That's who you're evaluated against. It's the best teams on your schedule. And for Tyler to beat them, he's going to have to play in the pocket.
Right.
Now, Vince.
No question.
The last part, and as we kind of dive into the why are we expect, because you and I are on the same page. We expect Tyler to have a breakout year this year, and we'll get into kind of what that looks like. There's a question about that, but there's a couple questions about this. And Patrick Barnes, I have your super chat. We're going to purposely bring your super chat up at the end. I really like his super chat is really fitting for how I want to wrap the quarterback part of this up. But Chris Wheeler gave us a super chat, big super chat, Chris.
Wow,
thanks, you
man.
Very, 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 very much. He asked a question, Vince. He said, I've been reminded vehemently by Brian that Tyler is very good going through his progressions. Can you talk about what you expect from him with the mental game? This to me, Vince, and I told Chris in the chat that we were going to wait to bring his super chat up for this reason. Because I think this is the part that most Notre Dame fans do not understandably appreciate about Tyler, because they don't get to see practices like you did.
Sure.
And they don't see the practice video that I got from you guys, that I've seen from Tyler with my own eyes at different things and different people I've talked to. And then what we saw from him in the spring game and some of even the throws he made last year, Vince, is they don't see that this is a kid that has a great feel for the game.
Yes, absolutely.
He's got to improve his mechanics, and his balls aren't always going to go where you expect them to go. But his timing, and I'll go back to the spring game, his first spring game.
Okay.
He banged a corner route to Mitchell Evans, and we showed it on this channel. It is Mitchell Evans puts his right foot in the ground, and Tyler's throwing it. He just throws it out, and Mitchell turns and runs right into it.
Yep.
And we saw that a lot from Tyler. We even saw that last year. His throw to Kevin Austin was that. He hit his top of his drop, and Kevin was not open. He just threw it out, dropped it over top. Kevin ran underneath it. Bam. His throw to Avery Davis. You go back and watch that throw. That was not his first look. He had to make a read to get there. And so I think there's this notion, like it was Wimbush, it was one read or run. It was 1-2 run, right? And the 1-2 was off of one read. Brandon would rarely kind of go through his progressions. He would at times, but rarely.
Sure.
Tyler's a kid, and I think that was more of a coaching thing than it was.
You're right.
Brandon couldn't do it. It's just that's what they did. They didn't.
It's not he was taught. Yeah, right.
Right. But with Tyler, he is a kid that will go through progression. And I've said this, I've shared this story before. I was told by someone around the program that there was a play. He'll do things in practice. You're like, okay, yeah, nobody else on our team can do that. And it's not just physical tools, because he doesn't have a bazooka for an arm. Like, he's got a good arm, but it's not a bazooka arm. But there was a play, this coach told me, he's like, he throws this ball in the middle of the field. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, all I could see is 3 defensive guys. And all of a sudden, a receiver just runs right into it and bam, hits him in the chest, and he goes running. He's like, I didn't even see it. I didn't see that guy was coming. Tyler did, and he just threw it out there.
Right.
And it's like, you'll hear stuff like that. I've seen clips from practice like that where you're watching it, and these are the ones like that you'd send me, where it's like, man, that's great timing. The anticipation there is really good. He does have a feel for the game. There's no doubt. Now, the question to Chris's question, that is, what to expect from him. I think, Chris, the big question is going to be, how consistently can he play to that level? Because it's one thing to read that out in the spring game, Vince. It's another thing to read that out and make that throw when there's 100,000 screaming Buckeyes, or you're in the Coliseum or whatever else. I think that is the part for me, Vince. But the tools are there. Like, love a lot of things about Ian Book, gritty kid, good leader, et cetera, et cetera. He just didn't have a mind for throwing a football. He wasn't good at progressions. He would always wait for guys to get open.
Right.
That's not what we see from Tyler Buchner.
And when you say wait for him to get open, he would need to see with his eyes that the kid was already open, not throw him open.
Right.
And that's the difference when you're talking about major college football and then into the NFL as well. And there's a reason. I don't want to get into that. You have to throw guys open. Okay. And I have physically seen with my own eyes, I've seen Tyler Buchner throw guys open. And I will also say,
and you're not talking about high school. No, Vince isn't talking about high school.
I'm talking about in practice.
Right.
Okay. I'm talking about in practice. I'm also talking about the fact that because he is not afraid to throw into tight windows. He's not afraid to throw guys open. He's not afraid to go through his progressions and stay in the pocket.
And he'll have some turnovers because of that too.
It was that you took the words right out of my mouth. That is a concern of mine. But you have to take the good with the bad, and the good is going to massively outweigh the bad in that regard.
To that, Vince, I think I'm okay him having a little Deshaun Watson in his game.
Yeah,
as a football player.
Right.
Only as a football player.
or like a Brett Favre,
Right. Because like with Deshaun, the year that Deshaun led him to a title, he threw 17 picks. Now, 17 picks is not acceptable, but Clemson also threw a lot more that year than Notre Dame's going to throw. I don't expect Tyler to be a 4 interception guy. I don't. It's a different offense. I think he's going to take some chances. He may throw 9 or 10 interceptions, but they're going to be. He has to then balance it with those big plays, Vince, and I think those are things we're going to see because he does understand. He understands football from a big picture standpoint.
Right, and yes, they are against the ones because I've seen it this year. We're talking spring ball. This year is where I was talking about what I saw. And yes, he was going up against the ones.
But it wouldn't matter to me if he's going against ones or threes.
Right.
The reason that I brought up like the spring game going against the threes last year was remember that deep throw he hit to Braden Lindsey, which was way underthrown? That he ended up completing it for a 40-yard pass. That's not a completion if Kyle Hamilton is on the field.
Right.
That's an interception.
Sure.
That's my point. But like the corner route to Mitchell Evans, that's open no matter who they're going against.
Right.
Because that's the time and the anticipation, things like that. But to Brian's point, yes, it was against the ones. And we saw it in high school. We saw it in the spring game last year.
Right.
We saw it in practices this year. And we hear it from sources.
Sure.
That are people that we trust that are fair, open people. So not now. If you're throwing a guy open, and it gets intercepted, then he's not open.
Not open. That's right. Right. The mentality of throwing a guy open can potentially lead to interception. Right. I get that part of it. And that's what we're talking about.
And that can lead to interceptions more in the National Football League than in college. Because that can lead to – because in the NFL, and this is kind of partly what's been the issue for Notre Dame, is a receiver may have like 4 different options based on what the defense does. He could run an in route, a post route, a stop route, or a corner route, depending on what the defense does.
Right.
Well, if you're doing that with young guys, they're going to think he's doing this and they're doing that. And that was part of Ian Book's problem. Because Ian didn't know how to anticipate, he would wait to see what a receiver was going to do before he would throw it. Right. That's partly why Ian threw so few interceptions in his career. He just wouldn't take chances.
Right. He took sacks a lot.
Right. Unless it was the fourth quarter and he had no choice. And then you could see what Ian Book could do then.
Right.
But to Lucas's point is that this offense is complex, but it's not that complex.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be miscommunications.
Oh, yeah,
And
right.
maybe that's where Lucas is coming from. Like there's a miscommunication where Tyler
Sure.
throws it out, but the receiver makes the runs wrong route. Sure.
Sure.
But that's part of it. You can't, the alternative is you just don't make those throws.
Right.
And that is, if you want that, that's the Ian Book offense. That's what that is. Or I'm not
Exactly.
going to throw it unless I see it. And you just can't do that. You can't do that. So, you know, I think that's the kind of thing where you're gonna take that.
Right.
You're gonna
Absolutely.
take that.
Absolutely. Because that was what was, and to be honest with you, that was the most frustrating thing about Ian Book is his lack of wanting to take that chance, his lack of throwing the ball on time. Like that was super frustrating because you don't see it as much on TV, Brian, but you see it in person when you're sitting up in the press box, or even if you're at the game and you're watching it from a bird's eye view. That's why we always sat in the upper deck on purpose, right? So we could see the whole game. You see guys running wide open and the ball is just not thrown, or just the chance wasn't taken, or however you want to say it. It just wasn't done. And it happened time and time and time again. And then he would get praised for all these other things that he was doing, rightfully so, but never criticized for not doing. And he could have been such a good quarterback. He could have been such a good quarterback at Notre Dame and taken them to that next level.
Right.
And brought Brian Kelly right along with him, to be honest with you. But he just wouldn't make those throws, and that's just not who he was.
Right.
From the limited amount that I've seen of Tyler Buchner, he will make those throws. He will take those chances. When you take chances, bad things can happen, but I really believe the good is going to way outweigh the bad.
Right. And that's what you have to take with it. So, but he does have to, he has that ability, and that's kind of where we started this. He is not a traditional, he's not what I would call a run throw quarterback. I think he's a dual threat quarterback, and those are two different things.
Sure.
A run throw quarterback is more of, like a guy who's not really a passer. His passing comes off of his running.
Right.
And bring that up here in a minute, Vince. I want to answer that after we. So put that aside for now. But I do want to address that when we get done with this quarterback. I think that's a really good one to bring up during the Q&A, because we will have a daily mailbag today. So we'll dive into a lot of those questions when we get to the mailbag. But like I'm trying to think of like a run throw guy is like Malik Cunningham from Louisville. I don't think Malik Cunningham is a dual threat, because I think his passing comes off of his running, to me. You know what I mean? Where Malik just can't sit in the pocket and hurt you. Brandon Wimbush was a run-throw quarterback. Deshaun Kaiser was a dual-threat quarterback. And Malik Zaire against LSU was a run-throw quarterback. It was running first. And against Texas, we saw a dual-threat quarterback, And a dual-threat quarterback is a guy that can sit in the pocket and beat you, but also a guy that can make plays and run. And sometimes you can be a dual-threat quarterback who doesn't run a ton. Joe Burrow in college was a dual-threat quarterback. Trevor Lawrence was a dual-threat quarterback, even though they were pocket passers, but they could make plays with their legs. I think Tyler Buchner is a bit of a unicorn in that he can be both of those things. He can be a run-throw guy when he wants to be, but he's more of a dual threat in his skill set. And I think that's what makes him dynamic, because, when you talk about his high school stats, and I get that his level of competition wasn't great, but you're talking about a kid that threw for 4,474 yards. I'm going to say it again. He threw for 4,474 yards as a junior in high school. Okay. 58 touchdowns. Okay. It's again, 4,478 yards and 53 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. Completed 66.4% of his passes. He averaged 16.8 yards per attempt in 13 games. He also rushed for 1,610 yards and 28 more touchdowns. He had 6 games where he rushed for over 100 yards in a game. And so when you look at that, Vince, I mean, he had a game against a school called Modern Day Catholic. This is just absurd. It's not that modern day. It's a different modern day. It's a garbage modern day. But in that game, he went 24 of 36 for 465 yards and 5 touchdowns passing. He also had 20 carries for 295 yards and 4 touchdowns in that same game. It's over 700 yards of offense and 9 touchdowns. I don't care what your level of competition is. When you're doing that, you're a freak.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's other games like that. Against Orange Glen, he threw for 437 yards and rushed for 110 yards. 2 weeks later, he goes for 414 yards and 5 touchdowns. He has 2 carries for 115 yards and a touchdown. A week later, yes, because he had a 90-yard touchdown run.
Yeah,
A week later against Classical, again, these are not good football teams. But again, you're talking about sick numbers, 309 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, and then he had 132 yards rushing and a touchdown. And I don't believe he played the fourth quarter in that game because they won 75-26. The next week against Santa Fe Christian, he had 303 yards passing and 3 touchdowns, 129 rushing and a touchdown. 2 touchdowns. If I remember correctly, he didn't play hardly at all in the second half. If I remember that game, because they won 49-0. And so, I mean, just some of the things he would do. They had a 52-51 win over Poway, who's actually a decent team. Threw for 444 yards, 3 touchdowns, rushed for 94 yards and 3 more touchdowns. In the last game of the year, their playoff loss. This is absurd, Vince. And their playoff loss, they lost 75-59. Tyler passed for 296 yards and 3 touchdowns, and he ran for 353 yards and 5 touchdowns.
Good Lord.
Like, those are stupid numbers.
Responsible for every touchdown.
And again, I don't care who you're playing against. Like, he was a freak. And that's what we're gonna kind of pull this up as we're talking, because I mean, the things he did in high school were just stupid, Vince.
Right.
And I think that I want people to watch this, because I think people need to be reminded of just how good this kid was. And yes, the competition sucks. But being a good evaluator is being able to watch and say, does that project to the next level?
Go back to that first play, Brian, and I want you to think, okay, where does he throw the ball from?
Right. It's about the 32, and it's caught at about the 23.
It's pretty good. And he wasn't set either. Right. You know what I mean? He was on the run when he threw that ball.
Right.
So that shows arm strength.
Yeah.
Right there.
This is the timing and the touch part that we talk about. Like, he just has this feel like he beats the top over top, but that ball goes like 30+ yards.
That's not terrible coverage. The kid's in the hip pocket of the receiver.
Right. This ball right here is another one. This is a backside post. It goes, he throws it from about the 48. Ball gets caught inside the 5. Right. But again, it's one thing to do that in high school. It's another. I need to see him that he's got the guts to do that.
Absolutely.
In Ohio Stadium or Notre Dame Stadium. And that's what I say is I don't necessarily question that whether or not Tyler has the ability to do those things. It's whether or not he has the willingness to do those in the big moments. But, I think the other thing too, Vince, is as we kind of go into why we're predicting a breakout from Tyler Buchner, is because when you can do things like that, you become more slump proof.
Yeah.
Because when you have a guy that can do it, like if Jack Cohn is off, that's a great touch, by the way, in between 2 defenders.
That's a zone throw right now, which is huge, because you talked about the fact that he can hit a one-on-one and all that. This is a zone throw here, and he places it right.
And he knows he's got to get some zip. He's got to get over the top and with zip, and he does that. You can't float that ball, or the safety's going to get over there and get to it. But when you are a kid who can only throw and your game is off, you're just in trouble.
Hey, look, a seam throw.
Right.
Be real good at that.
The thing is when you can run like this and do the place, this is an off-platform throw. When you can run like he can, if a kid's off his game a little bit as a passer, there's things you can go to get him going that can be big plays as a runner.
Right.
And that's the thing that you look for. Like this, he's getting – look at the buying time. Look at this. He throws this ball, the kid's not even breaking yet.
Yeah, and it's off his back foot too.
Right. Now, again, do I want him trying to make that throw against Ohio State? Probably not.
Right.
But he's also going to be bigger and stronger now than he was.
I hope he's not
as well.
He doesn't have a defender in his face that quickly either.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's also true.
Also
true.
That's why
he's not exactly playing with a bunch. This is just stupid throw. I didn't know where he was throwing it when I remember the first time I watched this. Like, where's he throwing that ball? I didn't even see that guy
across his body.
Yeah. Yeah. That's just dumb. So again, Vince, it's you when you have a guy like that, you need to be able to say this is one. He throws it from about the 40, the ball gets caught about the 5.
Mm-hmm.
That's a 55 plus. That's a 55-yard throw, correct?
On the money. Look at that.
Right.
Maybe a yard underthrown, but still.
Right. This is the pass he threw to Kevin Austin.
Yes,
that's basically what this is.
He didn't float that either. That is on a dime. That is on a rope. right where it needs to
Right.
be too.
Right. So the playmaking ability is the final piece, Vince, that is why I think, because I think he's going to have games where maybe he's not on his game as a passer, but he still can make plays in those instances, and that's the key. Whereas if Jack Cohn was off last year, like he was early against Virginia Tech, or then he's in trouble.
Right.
There's nothing you can turn to. With Tyler, there, and we did see this a little bit with Ian Book. There were games where Ian wasn't making plays as a passer, but he was still able to go out there and scramble and run around and do things. Tyler's going to be able to do that, but Tyler's more of a designed runner too. You can call designed running plays to Tyler Buchner. Right. That wasn't Ian's strength. Ian was more of a scrambler, not a runner. Because again, designed runs require decision making, and Ian Book wasn't the greatest decision maker. And so that's why I think they kind of went away from a lot of that stuff. But this is a kid that you can just flat give the ball to and say, hey, man, we need you to go make this play on 3rd down or 4th down or whatever. Right. And what you are saying, he's an elite athlete, but you also see on this film why I've said he's not a guy that you can move to running back or receiver, because he's not a burner. He's not like a 4-4 guy.
Sure.
Right.
He'll run away from a lot of people,
right,
but not your speed guy on defense.
Right.
I mean,
right.
Yeah.
Like that's the athleticism you see. Threw it from the 30 to the other 35 on a line.
I gotta put this one up here.
Hope we get that's great.
That's great. Awesome.
That's great, Robert.
Film. That's awesome.
Yeah, this is what we're talking about. I do not believe this counted in the stats. Usually when a kid cuts a film off like this, it's because the guy drops it. That's normally what happens.
You're probably right about that one. But it was a greatly played. It was a great placement.
Yeah, like this is the stuff that you see. Like that's just and we have seen Tyler do stuff like that.
Look at that. Boom.
I have a feeling that one got dropped too.
Oh, but look at that throw.
Right, but like when you're when you cut those off, it's
fancy cutting right.
But my point is, think of his stats and then think of how many passes and I've seen some game film. He had a lot of balls dropped.
Yeah.
Because he's making throws that his players just weren't good enough to catch.
Right.
If we're going to be completely honest.
Somebody asked about the talent around him.
It was
okay. I mean, he threw guys to be very good.
Yeah.
Put it that way.
Yep. So, I mean, these are the things you're saying. I mean, he's a playmaker. He's got an arm. He's got the talent. It all comes down to consistency, Vince. That's the key. But even without the consistency, then he goes out and has a Bryce Young type year. If he's consistent week after week, he has a Bryce Young type year, not numbers wise, but like dominant impact wise. I'm not saying he's going to do that.
Yeah, right.
I'm not predicting he's going to do that. What I'm saying is, though, he's going to be a playmaker, and he's going to be a guy that can take your offense to the next level. And he's going to have better talent around him, in my opinion, than what Jack Cohn had last year. That's the other thing. No, he doesn't have Kyron Williams and Kevin Austin, but that's not it. The gap in receiver and running back play is going to be far narrower than the gap in what the line is going to be. And that's the big thing. Because think about what that line was with Brandon Wimbush combined with Brandon Wimbush. I mean, you guys are seeing it on some of these runs. Tyler Buchner is athletic. He can run the football.
Yes, he can.
Right, and he's going to have that line blocking for him. And the Rams have a pretty big offensive line this year. I mean, they're going to have some size to them, and those are the things that are going to be key. But when people ask why are you so high on Tyler Buchner, it's like I'm like, you just got to refresh this a little bit and go back and watch. This is high school tape, but that's what we have, right?
Right, exactly.
I mean, high school tape is why people were excited about Bryce Young last year. High school tape is why people were excited about C.J. Stroud last year. It wasn't. I mean, C.J. Stroud threw a grand total of 0 passes as a freshman at Ohio State.
Yeah.
0.
Look at that.
Yeah. Again, those kids stink. I wouldn't recruit any of those guys to a D3 school, right? But it doesn't matter. That's.
But he still has to read the defense.
Right.
Still has to put the ball where it needs to go.
Right. You can see the athletic. Oh, so like against Clemson, he's tackled there instead of scoring.
Sure. Right. But again, he made there were some moves that he's made in the open field running the football that he made as a freshman, and he juked out D1 players. Okay. Right. He made guys miss last year at Notre Dame running the football. He did.
Right.
So I mean, he's still an athlete and he can still run the football very, very well.
Right. So Vince, people ask, why we're so high on Tyler Buchner. I mean, these are reasons why. And we have seen all these things with the exception of the deep over the top throws. And the reason I'm more concerned there is because his throwing motion has changed since then. Now, his throwing motion change has not impacted him from the standpoint of all the other things because we've seen him do those things, right? It comes from we've seen all the 20 and in, the timing, the anticipation. We've seen him do that with the throwing motion change.
Right.
What we haven't seen is I haven't. I'm not saying he hasn't done it in practice. I'm just saying I haven't seen it. Is can he bang that post route like he did earlier?
Sure.
Because at times, because of the shorter compacted motion, at times we've seen his balls kind of die at the top, and that was my concern. But that could also, foot where he didn't drive off his back foot and all those other kind of things. So I just look at this kid and I say, this kid's just flat out. I mean, and at this time as a junior, people were talking about he was ranked as a 5-star. I mean, he dropped the reason Tyler Buchner was not a 5-star recruit is two things. He had a really bad showing at the Elite 11, which I don't care about. And then he didn't play as a senior
year. Yeah.
Right. And he was the Elite 11 thing. He was trying to use a different throwing motion and it just wasn't natural,
right.
And he's changed it. He had some high school quarterback coach trying to get him to change his motion for some reason. And he's changed it back. He's more back to this than he was as a senior in high school when he was trying to change his motion. He's more back to looking like this guy.
It's almost like since he didn't have a season to play, it was like, okay, let's tinker with your throwing motion.
Right.
Like, don't change things because you're bored.
Well, that's the thing is, this is the problem with a lot of quarterback coaches, Vince, is these guys, they got to prove to you that there's a need for their services. So they got to fix something. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to pay you a lot of money. Just come out and catch my throws. Tell me, hey, you're great, kid. Keep doing what you're doing. Unfortunately, you wish they would do that. So Notre Dame's been trying to get him back to his more natural motion. So they've been working with this motion too, but it's to fix what was done by somebody else as opposed to them trying to change it like they did with Phil Dracovic. So, and the other thing too is what we were told is by the end of spring, every source that I had said that the competition was the quarterback was one of the questions we had, Vince, was, is there really a competition at quarterback? There is, in the sense that, if Drew Pine comes out into the fall and outplays Tyler Buchner, he's going to get a chance to start. Just no doubt. It's just that coming out of the spring, it really wasn't close.
Right.
I mean, and I have yet to talk to a person that felt that way.
Right.
And honestly, a part of me wonders if that's why Drew Pine struggled. I really believe part of why Drew Pine struggled is because of how well Tyler was playing and just the fact that, dude, this guy's really good. Drew's a smart kid. I got to go step up my game. And I think this is the stuff I love too. This is the kind of the off script stuff, the off platform stuff, like this kind of thing. Like, this is just like,
get it out.
Doing.
It was great.
Yeah. Yep. Like, he can do stuff like that. And, again, that's the stuff that Tyler Buchner brings to the table that is really, really impressive.
And they just haven't had that in a while. Right. I mean, that's the thing that excites me is, who doesn't get excited about big offense and big plays and dynamic plays and things like that. And look, Ian Book had his share of runs and things like that, but this is the total package, in my opinion. And they haven't had that total package and that opportunity to make big plays, both with your leg and with your arm at the same time. And that is what I'm so excited about, man.
Right.
I'm fired up. I'm so fired up for this.
Right. Like this kind of
it's helpful to watch this and talk about it and everything, because we have been talking about the recruits in the quarterback classes and things like that for a really long time. Why? That's what you do. And that's fine. But now that we're getting closer to fall camp and we didn't get to see him in the spring in the game and all of that, like, this gets me fired up.
This play right here reminds me of the play Brandon made against Michigan. Remember the 3rd and 18 play where they had him dead to rights and he just spun out and made that play? I mean, again, I think Tyler can do all the things that Brandon could do on the football field, except for Brandon could throw the ball close to 70 yards. I mean, Brandon had a cannon.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
Tyler doesn't have that. But to me, there are a lot of things that Tyler can do on a football field that by that point in his career, Brandon couldn't do. Now, again, we've said this before. The Brandon Wimbush that Notre Dame recruited was not the Brandon Wimbush that stepped into the starting lineup in 2017. He had been ruined at that point in time. And if you want to know why, I will just tell you to go look at Tanner Morgan's career stats at Minnesota before Mike Sanford showed up, and then look what they were the next 2 years. I'm just a little thought experiment for you. And you'll go look at Jordan Love's junior year stats at Utah State, and then look what they were in a year under Mike Sanford, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Just do that, and we don't need to discuss it anymore. The point is I do think Tyler Buchner can be the same impact runner that Brandon was, not to the volume that Brandon was, but the type of big playability he'll take a 3rd and 9 and convert it with his legs if you don't respect that. And that's not something Jack was going to do. And even Ian, to a degree, wasn't going to do that because teams were not and here's going to be the big key, Vince. Teams were not afraid. On 3rd and 9, teams would almost dare Ian Book.
Oh, yeah.
To throw it. Because they were not going to let him scramble and run in those situations.
Yep.
They can't do that to Tyler because I think that Tyler has the ability to make plays with his arm that you can't. But
I think they will early. I think that they will. Early.
What I was going to say is you have to respect his running ability more than you did Ian's, though, in my opinion.
Sure.
So to your point, I think you're going to have to play for him to scramble more early.
Agreed.
Which is going to make him more effective as a passer. And then you have the counter, and then that's what I think is going to make him so effective and why I'm predicting a breakout.
And I think let's boil it down to game 1, right? You got nothing. You've got the only film you've got on Tyler Buchner is what he did his freshman year at Notre Dame, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've got his high school film if you really want to dig that deep, but that's what you've got, right? So what do you do if you're Ohio State? Well, this kid's not going to beat me with his legs, So
with his arm.
Well, that's what I meant. But I'm playing.
Oh, you're not going to let him beat you with his.
Correct. I'm not going to let him beat me with his legs. So that's the way I'm playing. So if he can come out, he can hit some of those over the top throws. If he can hit those too deep zone pockets like we saw in the film, right? He can do that a few times, maybe break one, things like that. That could be a potential turning point in that game if Ohio State doesn't respect his arm early on. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just saying that's one of the reasons if I was making an argument for it's better that this game is first as opposed to having a tune-up game, right? That is where Notre Dame can benefit because there's nothing on Tyler Buchner right now, really. And what there is, his successes have been with his legs more often than not, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, man. It gives me some excitement about the whole season, but then also game 1.
We have a lot of questions that were asked about this subject. There's most of them we're going to address during the mailbag. So if you have questions about Tyler Buchner, quarterback, tight end, ask those. If you have other questions you want to ask those too. During the mailbag, we'll address whatever. But there's 2 super chats we got that address this, and they they're similar, but I want to bring them up, Vince.
Okay.
And the first one, and I said I was going to hold this to the end. Pardon me. From Patrick Barnes, he says, "Do you guys believe the difference between 9-3 or 12-0, a 12-0 season, is very dependent on how much Tyler Buchner can elevate the offensive play?" And short answer, Vince, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. They've been a quarterback away from being elite, in my opinion, over the last few years. They have been. If Tyler Buchner can prove that he's an elite quarterback, yeah, he's the difference. No question. Because you talked about the roster and how talented the roster is and how Ohio State, from a complete roster standpoint, is probably the only one that is better than Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
That roster will win you a ton of games
right
season. It will.
It'll make you go, not you're good. That's why the whole 6-6 and 7, 8-4, I don't buy that stuff.
Oh, I don't either.
The entire roster is significantly better than all but 9 teams on your schedule.
Right. Exactly.
Right. I think they're better than USC. I don't think they're significantly better than USC.
Okay.
Right. Just because USC is better than Notre Dame in certain areas, like they have a more proven quarterback, they have better receivers. Right. I mean, so they're at least good enough in those areas where I'm not going to say they're significantly better. They're better than USC.
Right.
Not significantly.
Better.
And my point is, if you have a quarterback that can't make plays and is turning the ball over, you will lose to a team like USC. As we've seen from Ian Book over the years, as we've seen from, Sean and I were talking because apparently he did a show where they were kind of talking about big wins. And we were talking about Ian Book. And we were talking about the big moments that Ian had.
Okay.
And, so we went back to like 2017 LSU, where he came off the bench, but then it was like 2018 against Pitt and 2019 against Virginia Tech, where he led them to fourth quarter comebacks. And the joke was kind of like the problem is like he was the primary reason they were in those positions to begin with.
He shouldn't have had to have a comeback against Virginia Tech that game.
Or Pitt the year before, 7-7 Pitt team. Because you remember, Ian had two interceptions in Pitt territory that game. He had 2 red zone interceptions against Virginia Tech. Now, I don't blame Ian for Jafar Armstrong's fumble that got returned 99 yards, but I do blame him for that shouldn't have mattered because you threw 2 red zone interceptions. And so you're going to let those teams hang around if your quarterback's not playing one and do like Ian was not good in the first half against Virginia. But why did they beat Virginia in 2019? I mean, Virginia had significantly better quarterback in Bryce Perkins. The difference was the rest of the team took the game over.
Exactly.
You had 2 strip sacks. One resulted in a touchdown. The other got returned inside the 10, right? Well, what was the final score? 35-20. That's the difference in the game right there. And so to me, that's where I think people are focusing so much on Tyler and not giving enough respect to the rest of the team.
Right.
And then looking at the schedule and saying, there are 9 teams on this schedule that they are just going to win because they are better.
Right.
Because they're that much better. And again, the coaching isn't terrible. The coaching is going to be better this year at every spot except head coach. And I'm only saying head coach because that's an unknown.
Sure. That's
We
fair.
don't know if he's going to be better than Brian
Okay.
Kelly or not. I think he is.
Right.
But the rest, the assist, he's got to look. The staff under the head coach is much better this year than it was last year.
Absolutely.
Just it is. And so they're going to beat 9 teams this year, minimum. The difference between 9-3 and 10-2 or 11-1 is, does Tyler play well? Good football. It doesn't have to be great, just good football. They're going to be at worst 10-2 if Tyler Buchner's just solid. Would you agree with that, Vince? They're going to be pretty good, meaning 11-1 if Tyler Buchner's pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely.
The only hope, in my view, for them to go 12-0 against this schedule, because it is a top-heavy schedule,
It is.
very, very good schedule at the top, is he has to play great.
Yep.
For them to be a 12-0 team.
Yes.
Unless again, there's always the exception of Ohio State just lays an egg.
Granted.
CJ Stroud throws it. It could be like the Arizona State game in 2014 for Notre Dame. Notre Dame should have beat Arizona State by 20. But when you throw 3 pick sixes and, you know what I mean, you're going to lose those games.
Sure.
Right?
Right.
And so unless it's something like that, but I've never seen that from CJ Stroud, so I can't predict it. And it's not something you can ever predict unless there's like a kick return, a fumble that Notre Dame recovers inside the 15. Unless it's stuff like that, you're not going into Columbus and beating Ohio State to start the year. You're not going to then beat Clemson and beat USC and beat BYU if Tyler Buchner's just solid. You will lose one of those games most likely, and maybe 2, including Ohio State. But for them to be a team that more so, and again, I don't think 12-0 is what they need to do, Vince. If they lose to Ohio State, if it's competitive, and then they run the table, I'm sorry, Notre Dame's a playoff team.
I agree with you.
They are.
And by the time that they're 11-0 in the last 11 games, they're going to have a heck of a lot of momentum going into that playoff. And how many times have we said it, right? Brian Kelly couldn't win that first game in the playoff. That's the next step. And
you're not going to win that. I don't care how much better Marcus Freeman is than Brian Kelly. If we're to assume that he's a better coach than Brian Kelly, and not who Brian Kelly was for much of his career. We're talking about who Brian Kelly was at the end, a dude that just had checked out.
Correct.
And wasn't the same worker he was. You have to accept this. The Brian Kelly that came to Notre Dame was not the same Brian Kelly that left Notre Dame. It wasn't the same guy that felt he had something to prove and had a chip on his shoulder and was still a guy that was more Grand Valley State than he was big time. He became a big time privileged guy by the end of his tenure, and that's why it's time for him to go.
Sure.
So we're talking about that version. If Marcus Freeman's better than that, it still won't matter in the first round unless Tyler Buchner is the guy we think he's going to be.
Right.
That's the fact.
Yep.
And so to get to that point, it's going to require, because the roster is very good. It's still not good enough to go beat a Bryce Young-led team. Because here's the reason we talk about Ohio State and Alabama. It's not that Ohio State has a significantly better roster than Notre Dame. It's that Ohio State has an elite quarterback.
Yeah.
Like, the reason a lot of us are not talking about the fact that they lost, like, Ohio State lost 2 top 15 draft picks at wide receiver. And nobody's like batting an eye. And it's not just because of Jackson Smith and Jigburf. It's because, but CJ Stroud's going to make these guys, they're going to be fine.
Right.
If they had a first-year starter quarterback, there'd be more concern, even though, hey, these guys are talented, but they got a new quarterback, kind of like what's going on at Notre Dame right now. I mean, Notre Dame has 3 top 100 recruits at receiver on their roster. And you talk to some people and you think they got a bunch of bums running around.
Right. Absolutely.
Right. But I digress.
I know.
But for them to beat Ohio State, to beat Georgia, to beat Alabama, to beat Georgia on their top-down ability, talent, to win those games, it's going to require Tyler Buchner to be the guy we think he can be. And that's the key. And
Absolutely.
So, yes, for Notre Dame to be the team that, whether it's 12-0 or not, I'm more concerned about get them to the playoff and then do damage.
Right.
Tyler Buchner, to me, is the key. He is the key to that. And then the other question we had was from Connor Patton.
Okay.
He said, how does your – and I'm going to ask you this, Vince.
Thanks for the super chat, Connor.
Yeah, very much so, Connor. Thank you. I'm going to ask you this first, Vince, because I want you to – I'm reading it. Usually you read it, but I want to hear your answer first.
Okay. Sounds good.
How does your excitement for Tyler Buchner measure up against past quarterbacks entering their first years as starters?
It's funny. We talked about this, I don't know. Let's call it a week ago. And I don't even know if it was on a show. It might have been just you and me talking. But I'm more excited this year for the starting quarterback in his first year. My next one would be when Brandon Wimbush was going to be a starter at Notre Dame. I was super high on Brandon Wimbush. I remember telling a buddy of mine, I think he's going to be an all-time great at Notre Dame. I envisioned him being, a two-way threat. He had a cannon for an arm, all of these different things. And obviously we knew what he could do with his feet, and he did that at Notre Dame. But I thought he was going to be more of just a better passer. And we've discussed as to why that wasn't the case. But I was so excited about him taking over as the starter at Notre Dame. Super excited. So that's probably the last time I was this excited about a starter at Notre Dame was Brandon Wimbush when he was going into his first year. But I'm more excited about Tyler, I think, than I was about Brandon. But it's really, really close. I was super high, maybe too high, but I was super high on Brandon.
I think for me, it's probably you have to go back to Malik in 2015.
Okay.
Just because, we saw what that offense could look like in the bowl game against LSU. And even then, Malik didn't throw a whole lot. It's either that or maybe Everett 2014 is kind of, I mean, I had to go back then because even with Brandon, like there was enough question marks with how Brandon's throwing motion looked that you're like, but you knew he's at least going to be dynamic. He was a great kid. He was a leader and all that. I think Tyler has more ability than Brandon had. I'd probably have to go back to Malik in 2015. It was the last time I was this fired up about a quarterback going into a season. Just the potential that he could bring to the table. And I think that would answer my question. And now, I mean, probably my answer would have changed in 2020 if they'd have handled business right. And my answer would have been, Phil Dracovic when he took over in 2020 is my biggest answer. But no,
I was looking forward to him taking over as a starter. But yeah,
I'd probably have to go back to Malik, and maybe it's not even that I was excited as much as there was the intrigue of because you saw. I mean, you had Will Fuller broke out the year before. Torian Folst, you had Torian coming back. You knew the O-line was going to take a big step because, Quentin Nelson was stepping in his first year. There's like a lot of similarities to that team. There's no Will Fuller on this team, except you could argue that Michael Mayer is kind of that version of it.
Sure.
But there was questions at running back depth chart, right? Because it was Torian Folst, and then after that, you had to move CJ Prosise to running back, and then you had a bunch of freshmen, right? Because it was Torian, CJ, and then, Dexter Williams and Josh Adams were true freshmen on that team, and so it's like, again, what was the running back depth chart? What was the concern about receiver? If one of these receivers goes down, they're in trouble because it's Equanimous St. Brown and the freshmen are really all you have left. And you had a freshman tight end behind Durham Smythe, right? And then Durham gets hurt, and but you knew you had a great young. I mean, you had a stud, basically redshirt freshman stepping in the starting lineup on the offensive line. In 2015, it was Quentin Nelson. In 2022, it's Blake Fisher. Now the offensive line then had a little bit more experience.
Sure.
Because Ronnie Stanley was a starter and Nick Martin was a starter. But, Nick Martin and Jarrett Patterson, very similar. Right. So, I mean, there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of similarities between that team. The key here is that Malik, and you've heard me say this, if Malik doesn't get hurt, I truly believe Notre Dame plays for a title that year. I truly believe it with all my heart. But, but even then, like Malik and Tyler are very similar in regards to Malik was going to have some games where he could light the world on fire as a passer. Saw it against Texas.
Right.
And then there was going to be games where his throwing was off. I mean, he was 7 for 18 against Virginia. But the reason that Notre Dame was about to blow Virginia out in that game, and let me remind folks that forget this, Notre Dame, the play after Malik got hurt, he set that play up by a long scramble, a touchdown up. He got hurt. The next play, they bring in Deshaun Kaiser, and he just hands off to CJ Prosise, who runs in for a touch, like a 26-yard touchdown, to make it 26-14 in third quarter. Notre Dame was about to roll Virginia. Malik gets hurt. The offense sputters until Deshaun leads them on the game-winning drive at the end. If Malik doesn't get hurt, they roll that game, even though he was 7 for 18. Why? Because he hit a big pass to Will, but he was still on pace for like 120 yards rushing. And that's the point I made earlier with Tyler is Tyler can be off as a passer and still be dynamic.
Absolutely.
Deshaun Kaiser could not. Deshaun's running came off of his passing, whereas Malik was just a dynamic runner.
Right.
And that's the difference. And so I don't mean like off like Brandon was off where he couldn't complete an RPO behind the line of scrimmage. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about like, I'm 10 for 20 and I'm just missing some throws, but you can still be dynamic. And that's where I think there's a lot of similarities between Malik and Tyler. I think Malik is a stronger athlete, a little bit stronger athlete, like physically stronger than Tyler was, because Malik was going into year 3. Tyler's going into year 2. Malik had a more powerful arm, but Tyler's a more accurate passer than Malik was, and a better feel at that age, because you got to remember, Malik came from an option offense in high school. Tyler's coming from an offense that was dropping back and shotgun and throwing the ball. So those are the things I look at and say, I'd probably have to go back to Malik is the last time I was this excited, because it also involves what was around him.
Sure.
And in 2017, I had a lot more question marks about what was around Brandon, because they're trying to roll, Freddie Canteen and Cameron Smith and guys like that out there. And it was like, okay, I'm not sure. And there was a lot of uncertainty behind Josh Adams at running back. Is Dex going to step up? You got Tony Jones going to be healthy? There's all those kind of things. So I would say 15 with Malik is it. So Vince, that's going to do it for the quarterback portion. We are going to have a mailbag coming up, but why don't you go ahead and just remind some folks of the things that they need to do before they get out of here.
Well, definitely make sure that you hit that like button, you hit that subscribe button as well. Don't forget that notification bell and share it with your family and friends. If you're listening to us on the podcast, give us a 5-star review and help us out. Share it with people. Let us know. You guys are our best advertisement is when you share it with your friends and your family and you let them know that you enjoy what we bring to the table. And as Brian said earlier, yes, this is a Notre Dame channel, but we love college football. So anybody that is a diehard fan of another team, if you come in and you're hanging out with us and you love college football, you are more than welcome. So share it up, folks. So now we're going to move into our daily mailbag section. We've got some really good questions. I've kind of been starring a lot of them as we have gone. I wanted to hit first, Brian, because it goes with what we were talking about in the quarterback section. We were talking about Ian Book and how he was afraid, or I shouldn't say afraid. Unwilling. He didn't make those throw the guy open throws, right? And Ryan Anderson had a question. And he says, how much of that was Ian Book and how much of that was coaching, though?
I think a lot of it was on Ian Book. I think the coaching exasperated that, to be honest with you. But, I mean, if you read reports, and I talked to people that followed what he did with the Saints, and they were having similar complaints about him in New Orleans.
Right,
exactly. He just doesn't process information well.
That was going to be my exact.
Yeah.
Nothing changed.
Right.
Nothing changed. And kind of as an example, right? Chase Claypool goes to the Steelers. He goes through rookie mini camp, and he's like, wow, I learned all of these new techniques, and it made me that much better. And that was a rookie mini camp, right? Ian Book went through a whole season with a completely new coaching staff and one that's really good with quarterbacks, mind you, Sean Payton, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
And nothing changed. So
right.
That tells me that it was more the player than the coach.
Right. And again, I think some coaching things didn't help him. But look, they were very easy on Ian. I mean, that's part of the reason Ian wanted Chip Long gone is because Chip was very hard on him. And Ian didn't like that. Brian Kelly was not as in his face as much as maybe he was Tommy Reece and things like that, right? And now Ian would kind of get on him because there was a trust there. But, they weren't killing Ian. And he knew he had the starting job. There was no pressure of him losing the starting job once Brandon left.
Right.
And so I think that was there too. But I think a lot of it's just Ian. And again, it's not a negative towards the kid. just some people have it and some people don't. And I just don't think he had it. I don't think he had that feel for the game, right? Like, you know, we can talk about Michael Jordan being the greatest and people talk about how explosive of an athlete he was and all that. But let's be honest, Michael Jordan was not unique athletically.
Right.
I mean, Dominique was every bit as athletic as Michael Jordan was. And there's, I mean, Harold Miner, that's probably an even better example. Remember Baby Jordan? Remember him?
Yeah.
He was one of the most explosive athletes I've ever seen. But why was he not the player Michael Jordan was? Because Michael Jordan also had skill, but he had an incredibly high basketball IQ. It wasn't just work ethic, and I mean that's all part of it. You need that, but he had an incredibly high basketball IQ. As much as I despise him in so many different ways, that's also one of the things that makes LeBron James unique is that he is a very intelligent basketball player, even though I think he's a giant D-bag. He's a very intelligent basketball player.
IQ is off the charts.
It's really excellent.
There's no question about that.
Right. And all the great ones have that, right? I mean, and it's part of it is like, look, you got to work at it, right? But it isn't, it's kind of God blessed you with it. And then it's whether or not you want to maximize it or not, right? So that's why the work ethic is like, oftentimes you say a guy's really, naturally gifted. It's almost like you're insulting him like, he was just gifted. Well, he was gifted it, but the great ones are the ones that then put in the work necessary to maximize that gift, right? And not all have. And so to me, that's kind of where I come from with it, Vince, is I think some guys just aren't naturally the game's just not natural to them.
Yeah.
And I feel like Ian was never, even like things like you used to get mad about. Why would you run out of bounds behind the line of scrimmage? Once you're outside the pocket, as long as you throw the ball past the line of scrimmage, you throw it away. And he would just not time. Why?
Oh.
I just don't think in that moment he could process, throw it away, throw it at the feet of my guy. I just don't think he could process that as quickly. And I think that hurt him. And because it never made sense. It'd be one thing on third down, 3rd down and 10 and you lose 2 yards, whatever.
Sure.
But it would be like on first down, second down. It made no sense. And it's because I just think at the end of the day, Vince, I just don't think he had a great feel for the game.
Right.
And I don't think you could fix that. And that's one of the things I'm a little bit more optimistic about Tommy Reece than maybe others are. I actually think he got a lot out of Ian, to be honest with you, and maximize what Ian could do. I mean, I would say if the fact that they turned Ian Book into a 4th-round quarterback actually is one of the bigger successes of Brian Kelly's tenure. And I give a lot of that credit to Tommy Reece. I think they got a lot out of Jack Cohn last year. Jack got better and better and better and better as the year went on.
Absolutely. No
so question. I do have some optimism in that regard. And it does revolve around Ian Book because I don't feel like the kid had it. And that's not an insult that he could work as hard. Ian Book could be the hardest worker in America and it won't matter. I just don't think he has that feel for the game.
Right.
And
agreed.
I don't think that changes. Right. Just like some people just have a gift for certain, math. Some people can look and just like, I don't know, just I look at it and I can figure it out. Right. And just where other people are like, dude, I know all the formulas. I know that and I'm a smart person and all these other, I'm a 4.0 student, all these other subjects, but like this one subject, Vince, you're a teacher. I know you've seen this before where you got these kid that just crushes every subject, but then there's just that one subject just like they suck at it. It's just like,
right.
It's same thing for this. It just doesn't matter how hard you work at it. You're going to have a cap on just how good you could be in that regard.
Absolutely. We got a super chat here from Matt. Thank you very, very much. He says, just contributing to the cause. Hey, you don't need a better reason than that, Matt. Thank you very much.
Yes, we definitely appreciate that. There's no doubt about it.
Got another super chat here from Patrick Barnes. Thank you very, very much. With Tyler's aggressive running style, how confident are you that he can make it through a season without serious injury? He's had one serious injury his whole career. I'm confident he can make it. Is it still a question mark? Yes. No question about it. It's absolutely a question mark. But guess what? To me, that's a question mark for every single player on the roster.
Yeah.
It's a question, can you make it through without an injury?
I actually don't think the serious injury is the thing I'm more concerned about.
Right.
I actually feel like the serious injury, as long as they're past Ohio State, I feel like Drew Pine can beat a lot of teams on the schedule.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
And like we forget, he when Drew was in the game, they outscored Cincinnati. From the moment Drew Pine came in the game to the end of the game, they scored more points than Cincinnati did.
Right.
They were down 17-0 when he came in the game. Correct?
Yep.
What was the final score? 24-13? So, there you go. They outscored Wisconsin. It was 10-10 when he came in the game. The final score of that game was 41-13. Now, if you take even the pick sixes away and the kick return away, that's 21 points, right? They still scored 10 points in less than basically a quarter of football with him in the game compared to just 3 for Wisconsin. So, you can win a lot of games with him. The more concern for me, Vince, is this is the more of the danger for a run through a quarterback. It's the nagging bruises.
Right.
It's getting your shoulder bumped where you can play, but it's sore.
Right, exactly.
That's when late in the game you don't quite have your arm drags a little bit, and maybe that's when you sail a ball that gets picked off. That's the stuff, the bumps and the bruises of a running quarterback is more of what I'm concerned about than necessarily the season-ending injury. The reason I say that is a season-ending injury, he's out, Drew's in, go win some games, right? Because my opinion, Drew Pine has not changed because he had a bad spring game.
Right.
It hasn't, right? Because I've seen him do it in bigger moments, play much better than that, and that's what I put more trust in than what he did in a spring game.
Sure.
So you can win a lot of football games with Tyler Buchner or with Drew Pine at quarterback.
Absolutely.
So if Tyler's out, I have a lot of faith in Drew Pine to run the offense. Having said that, if Tyler's in the game, but he can play, but he's got that shoulder bruise from a hit he took earlier, and he doesn't get as much on a deep throw, and the ball hangs a little bit, and safety comes over and picks it up. Those are things I'm more concerned about because those will have a greater impact on the game. And so that's kind of why I look at it and say, hey, that's where I'm more concerned about that than, season-ending injury would be bad, yes, right? Because then you're not going to go in the postseason and win a title. But if he's got to be out, like let's say he gets hurt in the first quarter against Marshall, I have full faith that Drew Pine can come in and beat Marshall, beat Cal, beat North Carolina, beat BYU, beat Stanford, beat Syracuse. I'm not worried about him again until Clemson comes to town.
Right.
Right. I'm not. It's just. Can you beat Ohio State? Can you beat Clemson? That's the bigger question for me.
Absolutely.
But I think people need to stop. I get it. It's what have you done for me lately?
Right.
Drew Pine went from the hero that everybody wanted to a dud because of a spring game in which he was literally, and somebody just brought it up, he was running from one offense to the other offense. Whatever happened, he'd have to sprint down to the coach, get the call, and then go back out and run on a hot day.
Yeah, right.
So I just feel like and look, he had a bad spring. I think a lot of it was I think once Tyler is announced as a starter, you're going to see Drew settle down, get back to being Drew.
Right.
And if his number's called, I have full confidence that Drew Pine's going to step into the game and go win a bunch of games for you. Can he beat Ohio State? That's a legitimate question. I don't think he can because of things we talked about. Can he put the team on his shoulders the way that Tyler can? I just don't think he can. But they don't need him to be that guy against everybody other than Clemson, Ohio State, and maybe USC, maybe. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that, Vince. We have at the top here, and actually, we had one more down here from Mark Stewart that I did want to pull up here.
Yes, Mark Stewart, thank you for the super chat. Do you have any sense of how Coach Golden's defense will differ from Coach Freeman's defense in terms of approach and philosophy? Good question.
Well, that's a great question, and honestly, that's a question that I asked Coach Freeman, when we sat down and talked. And, I think I'm actually going to try to see if I can find that and see if I can pull that question up because it was something that I was very intrigued by is the notion of like, you're coming in here and this is the thing. This is kind of what he said. My question is basically like, look, he's going to get to run his defense, but was there similarities and things like that? The final part of my question was, I said, is there something that you were looking for? So I want to find someone that has a similar philosophy, which would then make the transition to a third quarter in 3 years a little bit more smoother for your players. And his answer was, yes, I would agree with that. This is Coach Freeman talking to me when we had our one-on-one. He says the philosophy being the things we believe it takes to have success with defense. It's not the scheme. It's not, hey, you better run this coverage and these pressures. It's the ability to one, can our guys play fast so there's not so much on their brain that they can't play fast. Two, it still comes down to fundamentals, block destruction, tackling, pursuit to the football, and then takeaways. Those things he agreed with, and I was glad he didn't come in here and say, hey, here's the 5 coverages you have to run, and here's the 5 pressures you have to run, and we're going to be good on defense. It was the little things. We started talking about that, and I simply said he has the same philosophy as me in terms of how to be successful on defense. I have never said this certain scheme, as you saw last year, and he kind of gets in some of that stuff. So and then he ends it with, so I know Al Golden has those same philosophies. And that was right for he said, you adjust your scheme around your players, put them in position to play fast. So part of the reason he brought in Al Golden is for exactly this, Mark, because he sat down with Al Golden and it was like, hey, what do you believe in defensively? And that was a big part of it, hey, do you believe in the things that I believe in the game that I believe? So that's the answer to that question.
Philosophy. Philosophy is the big thing. X's and O's are one thing. Philosophy is another. And that goes, I mean, that's not even sports specific, I would say. You know what I mean? Right. If you can have a similar philosophy and you can have sports specific, then yeah, I think that's the key. And that's what he was looking for. He doesn't need a mini robot version of himself. You know what I mean? That's not what he was looking for. And he didn't get that. He got somebody that shares in his fundamental philosophy. And I think that's the most important part.
Right. Brandon K is next, Vince, with a question.
Brandon says, what do you think is the most important thing to look at when projecting the success of a quarterback in their first season as a starter? There's a lot going on there.
For me, it's how much of the offense can he run? I think that's the big thing for me. When you look at like Bryce Young, you look at CJ Stroud, they did not have to, rookie the offense up. Right? Like now, were they doing as much as Alabama last year as they did with Mac Jones the year before? No, but they also didn't have to put in a situation where you had to like make it like this rookie level offense, or he had to dumb down the calls. I mean, he could Bryce even though he wasn't where Mac Jones was when Mac was a senior, he was still really advanced and could run the whole thing. Same with CJ Stroud. I think those things is like, can they run their offense? Can he grasp as a bigger chunk of the offense than maybe what you might expect from a first-year starter? I think that's really it, because the more simplified you are, the easier it is to be defended in the bigger games. And because they do play some really good teams, I think that would be the thing for me. And then consistency.
Yeah.
I think when you're talking about a rookie quarterback having success, first-year starter having success, it's can you repeat things? Can you repeat your mechanics over and over?
Right.
Can you bring the same emotion on a daily basis? Or are you up and down? And ideally it's right here. It's not up and down. It's just, it's level. Can you bring focus every day? Can you be focused on the task at hand every day? A lot of young kids struggle with that. They're more easily distracted by the other things going on in life, because they haven't been through it for 3 or 4 years.
Sure.
Like the consistency of those things is just as important to me as your consistency going through your reads and practice, because it all leads to that. If you're going into practice and you're still thinking about the biology exam you bombed that morning, then you're going to have a rougher day, and then that rougher day leads to not a good week of prep, and then that bad week of prep leads to you not playing well on Saturday. Right. And so that is something that younger players can be more prone to having issues with, but that's just that consistency of mindset, consistency of fundamentals, and consistency of execution. At the end of the day, that's going to be the key for a first-year quarterback. The greater he can be that, Vince, then the greater he's going to be as a player.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you just said, but I will also say, if we're talking about the success of a quarterback, I'm also looking at what's around him. What are the pieces around him that are going to allow him to be successful, right? I think that's part of it. I'm one of the things I'm really excited about Tyler Buchner is because if he can distribute the ball the way we think he can, to go along with his dual threat ability, he's got dudes around him, man. He's got some potential dudes that can make plays. And so that's exciting for me as well.
And that leads to the second question that Brandon had, Vince. I actually think that's a great. Hey, look at you segueing your way into some great answers.
Learning from the best. What other one player on offense is the most important to Buckner's success? I wish he would have said position group, but one player.
I think this makes it actually harder, which makes it more intriguing.
Right.
So
there's a line for me.
While you're thinking, since you
Okay.
got to think about this one, for me, the answer is easy, and it's Lorenzo Styles.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because obviously it's not Michael Mayer, because you already know Michael Mayer's a dude.
Right.
The key for Notre Dame this season is at least one other player step up and say, I got you.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, the reason I say Lorenzo Styles is because Lorenzo and Tyler were roommates last year.
Okay.
There's a natural relationship there.
All
you
right.
don't always want Tyler in a situation where when the game's on the line, he's immediately looking to Michael Mayer, because you know who else is going to know that? The 11 dudes on the other side of the ball and the defensive coordinator.
Yeah, right.
Can he have the same faith that on 3rd and 5, or when he's scrambling, or when it's a big moment, that, if Michael Mayer's getting covered, and or even if he's not, the progression's taking me here, is he going to have the same faith in Lorenzo? And then is Lorenzo, because it's about his success, can Lorenzo then step up and get open and make those plays?
Okay.
To me, that's why you could go with, Blake Fisher, Joe Walt, you go with the running back, all that. But to me, that's why I go with Lorenzo Styles.
Well, I'm going to go with the running back. I'm going to go with Chris Tyree on this one, because and we talked about the dual threat, and both running and throwing are very important for Tyler Buchner. Okay. But I will say that I want the running back to be a legitimate threat when you're running zone, when you're running zone read. If the running back's not a legit threat, if he's just going to go down the second he's touched, you don't have to focus on him as much, right? You're going to overplay the quarterback side of things because that's who you're worried about. I feel like the running game, the running back needs to be a legit threat. So as much as I like yours, and I may have gone that direction, I'm going to be different. I'm going to say Chris Tyree, because I want that running game to be dynamic. I want that to be dynamic. And in order for that to happen, both of those guys have to be dynamic. So I'll say Chris Tyree.
I have a question for you, Vince. It's kind of a follow-up.
Ooh.
So my follow-up to that is, who is going to have a greater impact on whose season? Will Chris Tyree have a greater impact on Tyler Buchner's success? Okay. Like you said, so I'm accepting your premise. Or will Tyler Buchner have an even greater impact on Chris Tyree's success?
That one. I think Buckner's going to have a bigger impact on Tyree's success, because I do think that teams are going to overplay Tyler Buchner, and I think that's going to open up some massive holes for Chris Tyree, who is just going to show people why he's the fastest kid.
So basically a situation where on a play where Tyree may run for 15 because of the line, he's now running for 70 because the safety's worried about Tyler Buchner.
Bingo. Okay. Nailed it. Okay. That's absolutely what I think. Yep.
Okay. Got a couple quick super chats here from ICURN with Irish Luck. First of all, he's with the two super chats. Thanks for the content. On a plane to Cancun for my fiance's birthday. So happy birthday to her very much.
And to you.
Yeah, and thank her for letting you be on the show with us today.
Yeah,
we appreciate that very much. And then he had another super chat with a question, Vince.
Yes. See, ICURN says, do you think Kane would be a Tremble type of blocker?
I do. I think he can.
He has the ability to be. I don't know if they're going to ask him to be. I think that still remains to be seen. But yes, I think he can.
Similar body type.
Yeah.
Very athletic. More, fast. He's a fast kid.
Right.
And stronger than you'd think. And that was the thing about Tommy Tremble. People were shocked at how physically strong he was as a blocker, even though he was like 6'3", 240.
Right. Kane
is very similar size, maybe a half an inch taller or so, but he is a similar weight, 235, 240, similar athleticism, but very strong. So I do think that the one person that could fill that role could be Kane Barong. I'm hesitant to throw that role on him as a redshirt freshman, because Tommy didn't get to that point till he was a junior. He wasn't that guy as a freshman. He already played as a freshman. And he wasn't even really that guy a ton as a sophomore in 19. He played a little as a sophomore in 19. But, Cole Kmet was that guy. His role got much bigger as a junior.
Yeah.
And that's when he really took off. So he could. Yes, he could. I'm not predicting it because I need to see that he's healthy first. But if Kane Barong's healthy, would I be shocked if he takes on a similar type of role? No, I just would hope that they would use him more in the pass game than they use Tommy Tremble. That's my big thing. Now, I've been told that he's got better hands than Tommy Tremble. That was one of the concerns the coach had, is like Tommy would make great catches and then he would just drop one. I still would have used him more. I think you had to have him more of a threat in the pass game, but in practice he would drop some balls. And I think that was kind of key to some people.
Brandon K says, if quarterback at Notre Dame is one of the most high-profile positions in sports, why does it feel like national media doesn't talk about it much? Is that because of recent performance, ND bias, or something else? All of the above.
I think it's more of the first one. I do. And what I mean by that is the quarterbacks just haven't played well.
Right.
When was the last time Notre Dame had a big-time quarterback?
Brady Quinn, and he was all over everything.
Well, I would argue Jimmy Clausen.
Okay.
And he was talked about a ton too. I mean, Jimmy Clausen was a very hot topic nationally. But yes, I mean, the last time they had a guy that was that on a good team, it was Brady Quinn in 05 and 06. You're
right.
Absolutely correct. Because like in 2012, Everett was a redshirt freshman, and as Brian Kelly would always say, he was in the passenger seat on the bus. He wasn't driving the bus.
Right.
Malik gets hurt. Deshaun comes in. Deshaun was an interesting storyline that year.
That guy, if he didn't get hurt, I think
Malik could have been. Yeah, I agree. Here's what I'll say. And then somebody else had a comment on this. I want to bring it up. I was going to bring it up later. It's good timing. Sean Kane said this. If Malik doesn't get hurt, Indy goes unbeaten in 2015 regular season. And I actually agree with that. I think they would have beat Clemson. And he goes in and outduels Deshaun Watson at Clemson. I think that's when the Malik's legend would have been born as a player. Yes,
absolutely.
I agree with you completely.
And that's one of the things that, okay, if we're Ian Book, I hate that this is turned into a little bit of an Ian Book bash. That's not my intention in any way. But he didn't have that signature win against another signature quarterback or against another signature team. Yeah, he beat Clemson, but Trevor Lawrence was on the sideline.
And I think analysts were smart enough to, Brian Kelly and some in the Notre Dame media would hype up Ian Book.
Sure.
But the reason I don't think Ian Book got the national love is because people could watch the games and be like, this guy's not that good.
Right.
They're winning games in spite of him, or, he's kind of having a similar Everett Golson role where you're riding along the side of the bus. You're not driving the bus.
Right.
No matter how much Brian Kelly tried to convince us all that Ian Book was driving the bus, he wasn't.
No, he was not.
It was the defense, or in 2020, the offensive line. And it was guys like, it was Claypool. It was guys like that.
Right.
It wasn't him. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. It's just a reality. I think national media, like the year that Ian Book was finished 9th in Heisman voting, and Notre Dame tried to actually make a Heisman push for him that year.
Come on, guys.
He threw 15 touchdown passes in 12 games.
Right. Exactly. Come on.
So it's just kind of like, what are we doing here, right? He had 15 touchdown passes, 9 rushing touchdowns. And say, well, it's a short season. They played 12 games.
Right.
Notre Dame's never played more than 13 games. 24 touchdowns. That's like what Deshaun Kaiser just did passing in 2015 and 16. And so, when you look at those things, Vince, it's kind of like Deshaun Kaiser in 2016, it played only 12 games. He had 26 passing touchdowns and 8 rushing touchdowns. That's 10 more than Ian Book had.
Yeah.
In 2015, as a redshirt freshman coming off the bench, he played 13 games, but he only started 11. He played a half against Virginia, and he combined for 31 touchdowns. That's 7 more than Ian Book in fewer games played than Ian. But the point is to your question, is the fact that he finished in the top 10 in Heisman voting shows exactly why he is at the most high-profile position in sports.
Right. Because
of that. And it's because of the fact that he was the quarterback in Notre Dame. If Notre Dame was Boston College and had the same season in 2012 that they did, or 2020 that they did, there is no way in heck that whoever their starting quarterback would have been, unless he put up the same numbers that Ian Book had, would have been in the top 10 in Heisman voting.
No chance.
No chance. No chance. No chance. So that's my thoughts on that. But I think it is high profile. But I think the reason it doesn't get the love as others is because of the fact that they just haven't had a great one in a long time.
Yeah.
A very, very long time.
Absolutely. And again, they had to be individually great. The team has to be really good. But the kid has to be great too. And he's got to have, look, this day and age with media, and I shouldn't even say this day and age, since TV and all games became televised and all of those things, you need those signature moments, right?
Mhm.
And that hasn't happened for a Notre Dame quarterback in a long time.
Yeah.
You need those signature moments.
Yeah.
That gets you hyped.
Yeah. This is an interesting question, Vince. This is a good one from Sean.
Yeah, he says, when was the last time a Notre Dame quarterback made his starting debut with an opponent as difficult as Ohio State on the road? I remember Meyer debuted against Michigan, but it was at home. This is a Lou question.
Yeah.
You need, man.
Yeah. To me, I mean, because you go back and Ian Book's first start was against a 3-9 North Carolina team. Jack Cohn's first start at Notre Dame was against Florida State, who didn't make a bowl game. Brandon Wimbush's first start was against Temple. Now, his second game was against a really good team in Georgia, but it was his first. The question is about their debut with an opponent,
right?
Right? Huh?
The Wimbush Georgia game was at home.
Correct.
Yeah. So
correct.
And on the road too.
Right. Well, it's as difficult as Ohio State on the road. It doesn't have to be on the road, but as difficult. I mean, if you're playing Alabama at home, with all due respect to Ohio State, that's as difficult as Ohio State on the road. I think you obviously I'm trying to think going back. So Ian's North Carolina, Brandon's first game was Temple. Deshaun Kaiser's first start was Georgia Tech, UMass, something like that. Georgia Tech or UMass, I forget which one it was. You go back to Malik's first career start was against LSU in a bowl game, but that wasn't a great LSU. I mean, it was a big moment, but it was like the Music City Bowl. It wasn't like, and LSU was okay, but they weren't that good that year. Everett's first start was against Navy. Dane Chris' first start in 2010, I guess that was against didn't they start against Purdue that year? His first start was against Purdue. Well, actually, his first start was against Purdue in 2009. Remember, Jimmy got hurt. Jimmy had to come off the bench and rally him. So either way, his first start was against Purdue. I mean, I'm trying to remember. Jimmy's first start was against Georgia Tech. No. What was Jimmy's first start in 2007? Michigan. No, Penn State on the road. Penn State was good, but they weren't as good as Ohio State is. That Penn State team was ranked 14th when they played. They finished that year 9-4. It's not in the same universe as now the environment. I mean, 110,000 people. Sure. Jimmy's first start was in front of 110,000 people. His second start was against 111,000 people against a pretty good Michigan team. But that wasn't his debut. Brady's first start was not against that kind of team. Well, Brady's first start was in 2005. I'm trying to remember. Do you remember when Brady's first start was in that year, Vince? I cannot remember.
I do not.
I don't. It would. I mean, I don't think it was against USC, and that USC team would have been the closest thing they could have played. That 2003 USC team, but I don't think that was Brady's first start. I'd have to go look that up. Let's see, who was Brady Quinn's? Google's a beautiful thing. We'll see if first start against Notre Dame. We'll see if this comes up or not. But yeah, I mean, gosh, we're gonna have to go back and look a long time, And Meyer's first start was in 1990, right? Yeah,
93 draft, 94 draft. So
yeah. So because Tony Rice was the starting quarterback in 1989, so his first start would have been at home against number 4 Michigan. That was a pretty good Michigan team. They finished 7th, but they finished 9-3. I don't know if I would. I mean, they lost at home to Iowa. They lost at home to Michigan State that year. I'm not putting them in the same league as what we expect Ohio State to be. Again, this is all projection of what we expect Ohio State to be. Kevin McDougal's first start was against Northwestern in 1993. So again, I don't see Ron Paulus's first start was at Northwestern. I don't see a lot of Vince of these. I think Jarius Jackson's first start was 98, right?
Yeah.
Well, you know what? This may be it. Jarius Jackson's first start was actually an upset win over, I believe that was Ron Paulus started at quarterback in 97, right? Did Jarius start any games? Because I know Ron had some injuries. Did Jarius start any games before then? I'd be curious about that, because if Jarius didn't start games before he officially took over, like so in '96, he went 10 of 15 in the game, and for the season, he went 8 of 17 the next year. I don't know if he started a game or not. Some others might know the answer to that. But Jarius' first start would have been a home game in 1998, but it was against the defending national champion Michigan team. That's assuming that was his first start, and I don't even know if the answer to that is correct. But it does look like, I mean, that would probably be the closest thing I could find, Vince.
Okay.
Was 1998, Jarius Jackson, because maybe he started a game in injury replacement, but his first start was against number 5 Michigan. Now, again, Michigan ended up going 10-3 that year, but that's probably the closest thing I could find since that game.
Okay.
Would be the first one.
I'd say that qualifies.
Yeah. I mean, they end up not being a great team, but the defending national champs and all that other kind of stuff, I think leads to a heightened environment. So there's certainly no question about that. Very good question. I enjoy questions like that. Those are always a lot of fun. Always a lot of fun.
Michael Johnson says, any word on Joe Wilkins and Avery Davis?
No, I don't expect either of them to be healthy when fall camp starts. I think the hope for Avery is to get him back by the time the season starts. I don't think Joe's going to be – this is 100% pure speculation. We haven't been given a definitive word, but based on just some of the conversation I've had off the record, but then also just knowing what injury he had, I'd be shocked if Joe Wilkins is back when the first game starts. Shocked. So Avery's more on course for being healthy for the first game, but I don't think he's 100% cleared for everything yet. So, but I'm more expectation for him to be healthy than the others.
Mike Callis says, obviously don't know how the injury happened, but do you guys think it could be related to, he's talking about Mitch
Evans, yeah.
To the Under Armour shoe. Under Armour athletes suffer far more lower body injuries than athletes in other brands. I'd like to know where you get your information. And I'm not saying it's wrong.
I've heard this said before.
Okay, I have not.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean anything.
Right. Yeah. I just, like, Vince, I'm with you. I don't have data for that. And it could be very irresponsible and potentially libelous.
Yeah.
Is it libelous or slanderous? I forget which one is which. But
I'm not sure.
One of those two.
Purple, and I don't remember which.
Right. So it would be it would be slander. The libel is written, slander is verbal. For me to say Under Armour, quality of cleats create this, I don't have an answer to that. I have heard that complaint before, and I think part of it is because Notre Dame does have a lot of broken foot injuries at Notre Dame. That could be an issue with the practice field. It could be an issue with the strength conditioning program. It could be an issue with recruiting players that are prone to having broken foot. There's a lot of things it could be. I'm not going to get into that conversation. I will say this. That is always something that a program like Notre Dame should be looking into when they're thinking about those things. So like, hey, Under Armour, we love your clothes, but your cleats suck. So we're going to sign a deal with you for this, but we're going to sign a deal with this person for cleats. Maybe they might want to think about something like that. Because I love Under Armour's clothes. I just think, there is enough there for me to where if I was in Marcus Freeman's shoes, I would want to ask my medical people for that data.
Our data, absolutely.
That's what I would want. What I would want. So I'm not trying to dismiss the question, Mike. I just don't want to say yes or no without data.
It's also tough because you could hold it up against another company that uses a different type of shoe, right? A different company, but they're not necessarily doing the exact same exercises and the exact, like what there has to be a control, right? If we're doing a science experiment, there has to be a control. You use two different things, but you do the exact same things in them, right? I don't know how. It would be tough. It would be tough to come up with that data, I would say.
Right. Very much. So along those lines, we did have a question just pop up kind of along those lines from Josh Buffo, the motivational business banker.
He says, if we drop Under Armour, which we should.
Yeah.
There you go. If we drop Under Armour, which we should, who should we go with in your opinion and why?
I know for sure who I would not go with.
I know who you would not go with, but I don't know that I don't know. That's very interesting. That I don't know who they would go with. Do you think that the almighty dollar would probably be?
I would hope that Notre Dame would have enough concern for the fact that they are a Catholic institution, and knowing what we know about Nike and who makes their gear and their relationship with the country that makes their gear and all those type of things, that they would say, hey, look, this is not okay. And if you're going to take some of the stances you've taken about human rights and things like that, then that's a company you shouldn't be doing business with, in my opinion. Unfortunately, I actually think that would be the most likely option if they don't re-sign with Under Armour.
I do too.
Because it would be about money. I mean, Nike would love to have Notre Dame. But for me, I'd rather go back to Adidas. I would sign with Adidas. I would sign maybe with a shoe company for cleats, and then sign with somebody else for apparel. I mean, honestly, I would re-sign with Under Armour. I mean,
I'd say I don't mind Under Armour as much as there's some vitriol out there for Under Armour. I don't have that. I actually like Under Armour stuff. I do not like Adidas stuff. That's me personally. It just from the actual clothing that you purchase. Like I realize I'm wearing an Adidas shirt.
Yeah,
right?
biased.
I know, right? But that's who was sponsoring Notre Dame at the time. So, but I got
some Adidas Notre Dame gear. Dame gear.
We all should. I mean, it's but as I order gear for my teams, and like I'm talking coaches gear and players and all of that, Adidas is pretty much the low rung for me. I'm not a fan of it. The fit, the feel, I don't like it. So that's me. That's my opinion. That is not the opinion of Irish Breakout.
My wife loves Adidas, but she's also a soccer player, and a lot of stuff she wore was Adidas. I mean, that's right. Yeah. I was a Nike guy when I was young because I didn't think about things like forced labor being used to buy the shoes and things like that.
Players love Nike,
right?
Players
because they don't think about that stuff either.
That's what I'm saying. Right. They love Nike, so there you go.
Right. Again, but I can't. I haven't bought a thing from Nike in a long time, nor would I ever. And I just wouldn't wear Notre Dame gear. I mean, I don't wear Notre Dame gears on shows, but I wear Notre Dame gear around. Vince, I'm always wearing Notre Dame gear. I would not wear anything new Notre Dame gear if they went with Nike. And it would be very disappointing, but I feel that they're going to – the worst thing is if they went with the Jumpman thing. That would just disgust me. Why is there a basketball player on your football uniform? I think that's stupid.
I would absolutely hate that.
Yeah. And somebody said that, the players don't care. I know, but you're not just a normal state school. You're a Catholic institution. You should make them aware of why they shouldn't do that. But unfortunately, in our country, we don't care about that kind of stuff. As long as our shoes – and here's the thing that's stupid about it. The whole point of using labor from another country is to reduce cost. But Nike stuff is freaking expensive. So you have no excuse to not have it made here, in my opinion, because it's already freaking expensive. It's not for the consumer. It's so that you can maximize your bottom line. And I'm not okay with you using, people that are forced into slave labor to make my gear just because I can have a cool looking shirt. Hard pass for me.
What I sent you in your email this afternoon, which I don't think you've looked at yet. It's not Nike.
Okay.
So I don't want that to
okay.
Your opinion.
I'll take a look at it. I have not opened it yet. Okay. Now I'm interested. I want to know what you sent me. Okay. Oh, okay. I see you for your unis. Okay. Yeah. Good job.
Possible forms. Yeah.
Yep. Good job. All right. So somebody said maybe Skechers can get into the college game. Hey, they'd have an in. They got Joe Montana.
Absolutely.
Christopher Morgan said, "Let's try Puma for shoes." Thoughts? Is that still a thing?
Maybe.
Is Reebok still a thing?
I don't think so, but I haven't seen anything. I mean,
dude, I wear New Balance shoes, man. Like I've turned to that old guy because they're just comfortable. Let's rock some New Balances.
I honestly, I wear whatever my rep has laying around. He's like, "Here, have a pair of shoes." Those are my shoes. Like that's what I wear. So,
yep. Yeah, I'm and I kind of think you got to be careful about signing with just one company too, because
agreed.
I think that's the thing with Under Armour is I do think they make a really quality shirt. Like I got in on Under Armour on the ground level because they were just launched. They were really new when I was in college. They were a Maryland company, And I had heard about them because I hated having like, you'd have like just like a shirt like this and I'd have to cut sleeves off and they'd be like so soaking and heavy after practice. And then Under Armour came along with that stuff that they had. And I was like, man, I can dig
cool.
this.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
But it was just under gear because again, Under Armour, it was made for like athletes to wear under. And then of course they branched out into a million other things, but I think they make good clothes. I enjoy their shirts and their sweats and shorts. Yeah. I've heard the shoes suck, and that's, I don't
think I've never worn Under Armour shoes.
I can only say I've heard because my wife has, and they kind of fell apart kind of easily.
Yeah,
because like you remember BK Knights, British Knights, remember those?
It was mentioned that in the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. I bought it, man. I thought those were like the sweetest looking shoes.
They gave them away on Nickelodeon or one of those.
Yeah,
give those away.
Yeah. So I finally got because they were kind of expensive. I got my mom to buy me a pair of British Knights, and they look so sweet. But man, they like unraveled like in a month. Like the stitching went on. I mean, they were the cheapest crap shoes ever. Man, they look sweet. But so I don't think British Knights is going to be the move. So yeah,
Double Dare, right, man. Jose Ferrando said Double Dare. That's right, man. They give things away.
Yeah. Yep. I remember. Yep. I remember that. Let's get back on track here. We got some good questions. Yeah. That's good. Yeah. That's really good. All right. Let's got one from Archer 452.
Yeah. Our resident Ohio State fan. Yes, you will always be known as that. Which position is the deepest in 22 and which can least afford an injury? So both ends of the spectrum here.
Which position is the deepest in 2022? I think Notre Dame is deepest, Vince, along both lines. I mean, how many teams can say they have 8 guys coming back on the offensive line that have started games in college?
That's true.
You've also then got a 5-man, really talented freshman class. A couple of those guys could play early on if need be. I think Billy Schrouth could play as a freshman if you needed him to.
Sure.
I think Ty Chan physically could play as a freshman if you needed him to.
I think the answer of defensive line has been the answer for a while, for years, to be honest.
I think that is true. I would say that position is still pretty deep. I don't think it's quite as deep as it was a couple years ago, because I think they've come up short in numbers. Like they only have like 2 defensive linemen left on the board from 2 years ago, because Devin Upal moved to linebacker, then transferred, and then Will Schweitzer has also moved to linebacker. So you only have Jason Onye and Gib Rubio. So you have no ends from that class left. And then you got 4 last year. So I'd say deep, but it's still deep. It's just maybe not quite as deep with proven players as it was. But yeah, I think the defensive line and offensive line are the 2 deepest. Which position can at least afford an injury? I think there's 2 answers to this, Vince.
I think it's wide receiver and running back.
Well, yeah, I think there's an answer from the standpoint of numbers, and the answer would be what you said.
Yeah,
I think the player whose loss would hurt the most, I would have to say, is Michael Mayer.
Yeah,
because of the first answer.
Yeah,
right. I mean, part of the thing with what helps you with the depth of receivers, you have a stud tight end and a deep tight end room. You lose your dude, and that would be very, very damaging. Sure. I think the other position for me that I would say is a little bit of a concern for me from an injury standpoint is linebacker, and not so much overall, but just will. You know what I mean? Like just losing Maris would be crucial. But then again, you've got like Prince Colley, and you could move JD Bertrand back.
Proven.
But like
talent,
what he just brings a unique ability that others can't.
Yeah.
And somebody said can't afford an injury at quarterback. That was going to be my final one. But to me, that's different though. That's the one where I don't think you can compete for a title if this doesn't happen, if he gets hurt. But as I said, if Drew Pine is your starting quarterback for 12 games this year, I still think Notre Dame's a 10-2 team.
Mm-hmm.
I do. I have a lot more faith in Drew Pine. Now, I just don't think Drew Pine's that guy that's going to get you the title. He's not. He's going to. Well, Stetson Bennett. Yeah, but look at the team Stetson Bennett had around him.
Exactly.
Notre Dame's got a great roster. It's not that yet. You know what I mean? And that's the key for me. And that's why I'd say that would be my final one. But yes, as far we're just talking about depth, Vince, it's yours. It's pick one. Running, and I would say receiver more so than running back, because I feel like running back you've kind of already gone through injuries and you can't afford another one. You could kind of say that about receiver, but I'm more looking at injuries that happened this offseason. Avery Davis is one that was from last year that he should be back from.
Agreed.
Whereas the running back injuries are going to affect you in 2022. Yeah. The only receiver injury right now that's going to affect them in 2022, in my opinion, is Joe Wilkins.
Right.
Avery should be back. So I would say receiver for me is you can't afford to have another receiver injury, in my opinion. I'll answer this one quickly, Vince, if you want to just read that one.
Josh Buffo, the motivational business banker. Anything time frame you can release on the top 5 QB John Garcia mentioned yesterday, which actually was 2 days ago. But
no, there's going to be no time frame for that. We're not going to release that. I'll just say this because people keep wanting to figure out who it is. It's not the circumstance and the player. It's not someone Notre Dame's going to go after. So it's not even worth discussing. It has nothing to do with Notre Dame. It's not something they're going to get in on. I mean, I believe all 5 top quarterbacks are committed. So if they were open to being flipped, it would either be NIL related or playing time related, and Notre Dame's not going to offer either one of those.
By Notre Dame, so
right. So it's just not going to. It's not going to be. It's just not going to be something that we need to concern ourselves with, and we won't release that name. That's John's information to release. If John wants to release it, he can release it. If not, it's not our place to say. But it is very interesting for sure.
We are not Marshall, Brian and Vince, BKPTSD number 467. Thinning numbers at tight end, wide receiver, and running back. How does the staff keep Buckner from pressing and trying to do too much this season?
I think you still have Michael Mayer. That's the deal. Michael Mayer is still there.
Talent.
Yeah, you still have Lorenzo Styles. Yeah, you still have Braden Lindsey. You're going to have Avery Davis. Look, I know they're thinning, but they're thinning in regards to what's behind the starters. Right. If you just look at who Notre Dame is going to put on the field in their starting lineup, Tyler Buchner does not have to feel like I got to carry this thing. But that is part of why I mentioned earlier about losing Michael Mayer. It's kind of like Tyler Buchner's that little kid and you just took his blankie away from him for the first time.
Right.
You're not going to handle that real well. And, it's just another reason why I don't think he can be that way. So, I just don't think they're at the point now where that's going to be a problem for them.
Right.
They're just not there. Now, they could get there, but they're just not there yet. We have a couple more super chats here from ICURN.
Ooh, do you feel like thank you, by the way, for the super chat.
And for the next one,
Kane Barong has a better feel for being just a football player since they are similar from an athletic standpoint.
Comparing him to Tommy Tremble. Yeah, I don't think Tommy Tremble was a super instinctive football player. Right, I think Tommy Tremble was an elite athlete and a physical kid. I don't think he was a natural football player. So, yes, I would agree with that. Very good observation.
Another one. Man, he's flying the friendly skies and just feeling really good right now. Thank you very, 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 very much. ICU says, Brian, if Hunter Spears stays healthy.
His career's over. Stayed, yeah.
I thought so. I was like, that's it. Yeah. If he had stayed healthy, are you as high on his potential as you and I both are on Mills, or is Mills' potential way higher?
I loved Hunter Spears coming out of high school. I think he was really good. He was really athletic, really dominant. I had him as a 5-star kid. I think I had him as like the number 4 player in that class. I thought Hunter Spears could have been a dude. Riley Mills is very similar, and I would argue a little higher upside. Yes, I would. I think Riley Mills has a ton of upside. Now, I don't know if he's going to fully tap into it all. We'll find out. But yes, I think it's very similar. Now, they were different. Hunter Spears is going to be a 300-plus pound interior player, whereas Riley Mills is more of an edge guy that could play some 3 techniques. So they're different players, but in just comparing their ceilings, yes. And also, Hunter Spears staying healthy would have kept him on the defensive line. Because obviously I'm talking about a guy as a defensive lineman who played offensive line at Notre Dame. They moved him to offensive line. I still think that was a mistake. But a big reason for that is because of the final injury he suffered in high school, he apparently sapped him of his quickness and explosiveness. And that's why he ended up moving to offensive line. But if Notre Dame would have got the kid that I saw in high school, that was a dude. Right. A dude, in my opinion. He just, like you said, though, Vince, that's a guy that had injury problems. He had multiple injuries in high school. It wasn't just one. He had multiple injuries in high school. And he just was never able to stay healthy. But, man, he was a good football player, dude. Before he got hurt, he was a really, really good football player.
Yeah, Salty Virginia Peanuts question. If the great one, Jaden Greathouse, commits tomorrow and is a 7-on-7 teammate of Austin Novosad. Is this timing likely to influence Novosad's commitment decision?
Will it influence it? Yes. Will it influence it to the point where he ultimately picks Notre Dame? That I'm not as confident in. I'll say this: if he picks Notre Dame, if Jaden Greathouse commits to Notre Dame, and if Austin Novosad eventually commits to Notre Dame, and I'm not saying that, then I think Jaden, the combination of Jaden Greathouse and Braylon James, because they were both his high school teammate or 7-on-7 teammates, I think those would play a big role in him picking Notre Dame. That confidence level, because if he's going to pick Notre Dame, it would be over the next month, most likely.
Before, because I think he's actually said he wants to get this taken care of.
Right, which means he'd have to schedule a visit to Notre Dame at the end of this month.
Right.
The relationship with the Notre Dame coaching staff is not going to be the same as it is with the other coaches that's recruiting him. So you'd have to have something that can overcome that from a relationship standpoint, and it is Jaden Greathouse and Braylon James, assuming Notre Dame gets Jaden Greathouse. So would if they get him, it will influence it. But what I'm saying is I don't know if it will be enough to influence him to make that decision, if that makes sense. So if it works out that way, Salty, then yes, I do think it will be a big part of them having Braylon James and Jaden Greathouse. But I right now, if I was betting right now, I'm not picking Notre Dame. I think they're in the game. I think they have a chance. I think they wouldn't have offered him if they didn't have a chance.
Right.
But I'm just not at the point yet where the relationship is such that I can say, hey, let's do that. Yep. So there we go.
Archer, again, with another question. Thanks, man. What are the realistic expectations for Tyler Buchner this season? Over under 3,300 yards, over under 28 touchdowns, and over under 10 interceptions. We're talking passing touchdowns at the 28, Brian?
It sounds like he's looking at passing yards. Okay. The passing yards, boy, that's a good pick for over under, because I think it could potentially be right around that. I'm probably going to go under.
Say under.
Just because, for two reasons. I've kind of said like maybe 3,000 is a more realistic number unless he just goes off. The reason I say that it's twofold, Vince, is he's going to have more rushing yards than some other quarterbacks. And I do believe Notre Dame is going to have a lot of blowouts this year. I mean, there's some – look, and this is what I've said. You've got 11-2 Ohio State, 10-3 Clemson, 10-3 BYU on your schedule.
Sure.
And your combined opponents, with those three included, is a losing record, because there are some garbage teams on your schedule. Navy sucks.
Didn't you say
yes.
If you flip-flopped USC's schedule, then it's a 500.
It's barely over 500. Yeah, barely over 500. If they're 8-4 instead of 4-8. I mean, there's some teams on the schedule. Now, there's some teams, like I think North Carolina is going to be better. BC is not 6-6 if Phil Dracovic plays the whole year. They're 4-2 with him as a starter, 2-4 with him out, right? But it's not like they're 10-2, right? I mean, UNLV stinks. Syracuse is not good. I don't think Stanford's going to be that good. Marshall is good for their level. They're not on Notre Dame's level. Cal's not very good. So even though there's some really good teams, a couple decent teams, and then a bunch of on the schedule. And that's as about a professional analysis I can give about some of these other schedules. And so I don't think he's going to play deep, because I do think there's merit to get Drew Pine in the game earlier than you normally would get a backup quarterback into the game. Once you get past the first couple games, I'm leaving Tyler Buchner in maybe an extra series just because he needs to work. But like once you get past BYU, if I'm blowing UNLV out at halftime, I'm taking Tyler out, let Drew run with the first team offense,
because he is going to be taking more hits. I mean, you don't want him
to. Drew needs the work. Yes.
Last thing I want as a Notre Dame fan is for Tyler Buchner to get hurt when there's no reason for him to be in the game.
It's 35-6 at halftime. Right. And, there's this thing, you got to play him at least part of the third. There's, it's one of those old coaching things of, you got to take him. No, if it's halftime and you're up 42-0 on UNLV, no starter should play the third quarter.
Right.
Now, it'd be different if it was game 2. Again, that's, but when you're getting to that point in the season, and then here's the other thing. The earlier you get Drew into a game like that, the earlier you get Steve Angeli into a game like that. Because then you let Drew run the first team offense and then maybe a couple second team, and then, give Steve Angeli a couple series in the fourth quarter.
Right.
And so, so that might tamp down his yards. But but again, I also think part of it is he's going to have more running numbers. And I think Notre Dame's going to be a really good running team. So I'd probably go under 3,300, but it would not shock me if Tyler's over, because I do think he's going to throw the ball effectively. But I would say under 3,300 just for the reasons that I mentioned. Just that they're going to have some blowouts and they're going to be a little bit more balanced than these other teams. But 3,000 is probably closer to the number I'm kind of looking at. 28 touchdowns. I'm actually going to go over on that.
Wow.
Yeah, I think he's going to get closer to 30 on that.
Okay.
10 interceptions. I'm going to go under, slightly under, like 8 or 9.
I'm under on all 3. I think he's going to be single digits in the interceptions. If he gets to 10, I start to get a little bit worried.
Yeah.
I just think he's going to have a bunch of rushing touchdowns too, and so I want to tamp down my expectations of through the air, to be honest. And then that kind of is the same explanation for the 33. Right. So I'm taking under on all, but again, that doesn't mean he's not going to be super successful. I'll say under.
I'll say this, Vince. Part of the reason that you just said is accurate, but that's also why I think he's going to get to 30 touchdowns. In this offense, to get to 30-plus touchdowns, you have to have a lot of short touchdown passes.
Right, absolutely.
And I think teams are going to be so focused on him running the ball and Audric Estimate, he's going to have some 2-yard touchdown passes.
Right.
You're going to have some RPO touchdowns. You're going to have some bootlegs where he's just going to throw to a wide open guy. You know what I mean? So it's stuff like that. I also think the same reason that I'm excited to see, guys like Chris Tyree and guys like that, I think that's going to benefit the pass game as well. I think between Tyree, Lindsey, and Styles, you're going to have some long touchdowns where you didn't have a lot of those long touchdowns in the past.
You got some game
and again,
break.
It also goes back to you're going to play some teams that are going to be pretty crappy. And, because Ian Book threw 34 touchdowns a couple years ago, right? And a big reason is because he racked up a lot of touchdowns in like 5 games.
Yeah.
He had like 19 touchdowns in like 5 games that year. It was really kind of nutty. I'm going to pull this up. So he had 5 touchdown passes against New Mexico, who was 2-10. He had 5 touchdown passes against Bowling Green, who was 3-9. He had 5 touchdown passes against Navy, who was actually decent that year, but their defense was garbage. And then he had 4 touchdown passes against Duke and 4 touchdown passes against Stanford. So that's 15. That's 19. That's 23 touchdowns in 5 games against team. And Duke was 5-7 that year. Stanford was 4-8 that year. Those were bad teams. 23 touchdowns in 5 games. That means in Notre Dame's other 8 games that year, he threw 11 touchdowns.
Yeah.
So but I think Notre Dame plays teams like that where Tyler Buchner could have 4 or 5 touchdown passes, because what were the touchdown passes that game? He threw a crossing route to Avery Davison, went for a 50-yard touchdown against New Mexico. He threw the crossing route to Javon McKinley, who made like 8 missed tackles and ran it in for like a 60-yard touchdown. Those don't happen against Georgia. And, you know what I mean? And so you'll get some of those in games like that too. So that also factors into my thoughts. But I mean, if he's under 28, I'm not going to be mad. I'm just kind of projecting and just kind of feeling good about this one. So yeah, I'm going to go over on that one.
Irish Chi-Town Brian, if Tyler has a breakout year, which would be awesome because we're probably winning a national championship, and goes pro, what does the quarterback room look like? Well, first of all, he can't go pro after this year. He has to wait 2 years to go pro.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. I mean,
right.
He's going to be playing next year, no matter what. So after that, the quarterback room looks like potentially Drew Pine still being here. Potentially. It's possible.
I don't see it.
No.
Yeah.
I would say no. So you've got Steve Angeli, you've got whoever they get in the 23 class, and you've got Carr. That's your quarterback room.
Yeah.
Not a bad quarterback room.
Yeah, but your 2 most talented players would most likely be younger guys. That would be my only That would be my only concern.
Right. Whoever the 23 quarterback is and CJ Carr are going to be your most talented guys. You'll have one guy with 1 year in the program and one guy with none.
Now, another scenario is perhaps there's a 1-year transfer that they could take to be a bridge between Buckner and Carr. So that way CJ doesn't have to play as a freshman. Like, let's say that Angeli and the 23 quarterback just aren't ready yet.
Yeah.
They could do something like that, and go that route. So that would be an interesting one.
Benjamin asks, how much do you weight Tyler Buchner breakout this season to the new coaching at wide receiver?
A lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot.
You got to have
No
somebody
question.
to. You got to have somebody to be able to get off press coverage. You got to get somebody who's going to be good at the top of their routes. You got, if you don't have that, you've got less options.
Right.
So that's huge. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's big time. And speaking of the quarterback room, I thought this would be a good time to bring up this super chat.
Beautiful. David Flores, thank you very much. I checked into the show late. Not sure if it's been mentioned earlier. Have the Irish offered a scholarship to Kenny Minchie, who is a 23 quarterback?
So whenever Kenny Minchie does or doesn't get an offer from Notre Dame, that's his news to break. So until Kenny announces whether he does or doesn't have a scholarship from Notre Dame, it's really not. That's his news to break. I'll just say this: Notre Dame is working on building a relationship with Kenny Minchie. It's about as much like they're recruiting him. I'm comfortable saying that, completely comfortable saying that, and that's why we've written stories about him.
Yeah.
Right, not hiding anything. Regardless of whether or not he gets an offer, I mean, that's on him to break. Because here's the thing: he's committed to Pitt, and he's not a kid that's looking to flip. Right. I think Notre Dame is a very attractive option for him for obvious reasons. But you got to be careful if you announce an offer and then announce interest, and let's say Notre Dame goes in a different direction and gets Austin Novosad, then now you've hurt your program you've been recruiting players to at Pitt. So if I was in Kenny's shoes, I wouldn't want to necessarily announce an offer until I knew that Notre Dame was serious about taking me if I were to make the decision to flip.
Yeah.
And I'm not giving you information. I'm just saying there's a lot more to this than just kid gets offered. He runs to Twitter with a graphic and says, "Hey, I've been offered."
Yeah.
It's different for him than it is for a tight end saying, "Hey, thanks for the offer."
Right.
So that's what let's say. Bernie is pretty fired up about what he thinks Tyler Buchner is going to do this year.
3,000 yards passing, over 1,000 yards rushing. The Fighting Irish O is going to roll. Go Irish. I think 3,000, absolutely a possibility. 1,000 is going to be a push for me. I don't think it happens. I think he's maybe.
He won't do both of them. He could do one of them,
but
he won't do both of them.
Getting that high in the rushing. Yeah. But we'll see. We'll see.
Got a super sticker from actually a super chat. I didn't see the bottom of that, but yes, go ahead, Vince.
Thanks, Charlie Weiss's last belt loop. Appreciate the super chat. Just want to say great job on the 365 show, BD. Vince, question for you. I don't follow ND other sports besides football. Was the hire for baseball smart?
I would say to bring that up tonight with Sean Stiers.
And I can speak to the conversation that Sean and I had about this particular topic yesterday. And let's just put it this way. They followed the same blueprint that they used to hire Link Jarrett. Okay. They went for a Southern coach at a smaller conference who had a lot of success, and it worked last time.
Mm-hmm.
So I will say that, but he can definitely give you more specifics to him, because he's really kind of dug into his resume. And we're talking about Coach Stifler, who was announced as Notre Dame's next head coach. But again, they follow the same path that they used for Link Jarrett that they weren't using in the past with Mickey Aoki and the guys before him. So they followed the new way of hiring a coach at Notre Dame. So hopefully it works out the same way.
I will say this, Vince. I don't want to talk about it too much because that's Sean's. We'll talk about it tonight at we got the banner for that, right, Sean? Right, Vince?
We do.
Which
that one
we forgot to do, but tuning in tonight to the Ivy Nation Sports Talk, they'll talk about it more. I think it was fascinating. Link Jarrett had good success at UNC Greensboro, which is in the Southern Conference. He finished first in his division. He was there for 7 years. He finished first in his division once. Coach Stifler, I mean, again, good success because about where he went. He went 215 and 166 in 11 years at VCU. Coach Stifler went 352 and 207. He finished first in that division 3 times and advanced to the NCAA tournament 3 times. Link Jarrett never advanced to the NCAA tournament.
Right.
So had a lot of success. Now, better league. Right. I mean, that's the thing. He's in a better league. I'm not saying he's a better coach than Link Jarrett. I'm just saying like I'm backing up Vince's comment about similar philosophy. Here's the other thing. He's about 3 or 4 years younger than Link Jarrett was at the same age.
What about my age? I think he's like
He's 43.
Okay,
A
yeah.
little older than you. Yeah. He turned 43 in April.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and he played at George Mason. He was an assistant coach at George Mason before taking over at VCU. And Virginia is a very good state for baseball.
Yeah.
So it'd be nice if he could use some of those connections to start getting some more Virginia kids in here. But which is hard because Virginia and Virginia Tech both have very good baseball programs.
Yeah.
And you can't go to their same like, no, you don't. You got to come here to get a good education. Like, bro, I don't even know about the school in Charlottesville, but it's pretty good.
Yeah.
But they can't take them all, right? So that'd be pretty nice. But yeah, it's good track record. I'm looking forward to hearing what Sean has to say about him tonight. No question about it. Here's a very interesting one.
Irish Chi-Town, do you think history will show that Coach Freeman is better than Coach Kelly? I have a real simple answer for this, and I know we could probably do an entire show on this. My simple answer, if he doesn't win a national championship, then no.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think so. And as much as I despise a lot of things about Coach Kelly, he was very successful at Notre Dame doing what he did. He just didn't win a national championship. He didn't get them to win a game in the playoff either.
Yeah.
I will say that. So if
never won a big game.
Win big games on a consistent basis,
yeah,
win in the playoff, and win a national championship, then absolutely. If he can't get them over the hump, then no, I don't.
So I'm going to ask you, Vince. Yes, you're correct in that, but I think Chi-Town is asking us if we think that's going to happen.
Oh, he does say that. Do you think?
Right. So you're correct. If he doesn't win a title, he won't be remembered better than Brian Kelly. I think he'll be more likable than Brian Kelly.
I don't think that's even a debate.
But do you think history will show that Coach Freeman is better than Coach Kelly? I'm going to say yes.
I do.
And I think it's not just about he's going to get the thing that Marcus Freeman could never get. It goes deeper than that for me. It goes to he's going to be someone who's going to leave a much greater legacy as someone who embraced Notre Dame, as someone who kind of made Notre Dame's brand stronger because he wasn't someone who spent his entire career talking Notre Dame down, talking about how the things that make Notre Dame unique are hindrances. Like Brian Kelly spent a lot of his career talking down the school he coached at.
Absolutely.
And that drove me nuts. Marcus Freeman's not going to do that.
Like that's really what it all comes down to too.
Right.
That's why he did it. He was making
it
before he even needed to be
right. And the other thing is I think that he's going to be someone who is going to have a greater impact on his players. I don't know how many Notre Dame players are going to look back in 20 years and have the same affection for Brian Kelly that Lou Holtz players have for Lou Holtz. I'd be shocked if that happens. Unless I only talk to the players that didn't like Brian Kelly.
Right. You don't think there's going to be a Holtz's heroes type of?
No.
There's going to be Kelly's kids or something like that?
No. Okay. Do I think Notre Dame players are going to feel that way about Marcus Freeman in 20 years from now? I do.
Freeman's fellas. You can go
whatever the name is. They're going to have that. They're going to have former players going to come back and be like, have the Coach Freeman impact on what he did in my life and that time. And because it's not just football, it's that time that I was going through this and Coach Freeman was there for me when, it's those kind of things. Like, I think that's what to me is also part of your legacy. So it all ties in together. And yes, I do believe that we will look back and say that Marcus Freeman was a more successful coach and a better coach at Notre Dame than what Brian Kelly was at Notre Dame. Right. And so, yes, and of course the recruiting is going to be better.
Yeah. Granted.
Yeah. It's not going to be close.
Salty Virginia Peanuts. How active was Buckner in recruiting the 23 class? If it might not matter for some, but some, like the great one, will likely play in 23. Not
very. That's just not Tyler's thing. He's a pretty quiet kid.
Active in it.
Yeah, he wasn't super active recruiting the 2021 class. That's just not his personality. I wish he was more like that, but he wasn't. Now, I'll say this. Tyler was very engaged with those recruits when they were on campus. They met him, they hung around with him, but he's not like, playing video games with them long distance and stuff. You know what I mean? Like, it's not that. his role was more, from what I understand, like when they were on campus, showing them around, meeting them, hanging out with them and stuff like that, more so than the other aspect of it. So
Sure.
yes, it's a little different. Here's a good one, Vince. Here we go.
Irish Chi-Town, Brian and Vince, who are your top 5 Notre Dame quarterbacks of all time? I cheated. I already wrote it down.
Okay. I'm just going to say I never answer a question all time if it's someone I didn't see play. So I will not have Joe Montana on my list. I will not have Johnny Lujack, John Hewart, Hart,
But
Angelo Bertelli,
absolutely.
Tom Clements, all those. Lou Emoji's top 5 list would look so much different than my top 5 list because he saw those guys play.
Right.
I did not. So why don't you go ahead, Vince, and give your top 5?
You want to go 5-1 or 1-5?
Let's go 5-1.
I know this one's going to shock some people, but I like Tommy Reece. I like him play. He's kind of an underdog to me. Always played above his head. Yes, he turned the ball over, but that's because he thought his arm was as big as his brain, basically. And, I got respect for that. So I like Tommy. I like Tommy as a player. I did. He's my number 5. My number 4, I already talked about him. It was Brandon Wimbush. I love watching him play the game. I wish he had more success. It wasn't all his fault, but he's my number 4. My number 3 is Tony Rice. I have vague memories of him playing and just running all over the field. And, he would also fall into that category of kind of an overachiever. And, when he got the starting job, a lot of people didn't think that he deserved it and all of these different things, right? So, and not to mention, also, I will also say when I was a kid, he was so active in the community and he stayed in the community after college. And so he was always at like some school functions and he would be around and you actually got to meet him and things like that. And I thought that
Who is that, Vince?
Rice.
Okay.
I thought that was really cool. I actually met him when I was a kid. You know what I mean? So that's my list. Number 2 is Rick Meyer. He was my first Notre Dame quarterback crush. There's no question about that. I had a Seattle Seahawks Rick Meyer jersey when he got drafted. I loved Rick Meyer. He was my guy back in the day. And then my number 1 all time is Brady Quinn. No question.
So I missed your 4 because I was putting my list together. I heard Reece at 5. I heard Tony at 3, Meyer at 2, and Brady at 1. Who's your 4? Wimbush. Okay.
Yep.
So for me, Wimbush would not have been eligible because I just can't put a guy who's a 1-year starter. And if I was, I would have gone with Kevin McDougal. So here, just my criteria. We can all use different criteria. I'm going to go 5-1. My number 5 was Rick Meyer. I thought Rick was a good college quarterback. I thought Rick played on some great teams. And I felt like my knock on Rick is that I don't think he was a great fit for the offense.
Sure.
So that tamped down his production. And he won some big games, but he would all like that team. And the quarterback gets the credit for wins and the blame for losses. They had some bad losses that ruined teams that should have played for championships. Like a couple losses to Stanford during his career, just games you're like, man, I just shouldn't have done that. But he was still a great quarterback. Number 5, 90 to 92, they were some really good football teams. Number 4, this is going to drive a lot of people nuts, Vince, and they're going to hate it and they're going to disagree with me. I don't care. Jimmy Clausen.
I knew you were
Jimmy Clausen was a phenomenal quarterback in his last 2 years in Notre Dame, especially his last year. And he played on bad teams. And like, he said, well, it's win-loss record and all that kind of stuff. And it's because he played on crap teams. And honestly, if it wasn't for Jimmy, they would have been way worse than 6-6.
But it's not, but I'm not looking at this as were they any good? Like that's not how I put my list together. It's the one I liked.
Oh, okay. I'm going for top. To me means best. So I'm just going for best.
I did not like him as a human.
I don't care about him. I agree with you on that. Right.
My criteria. Who are the guys I liked watching? Who are the guys?
Okay. I'm kind of going with best, and I'm kind of ranked them like had the best careers.
Would have been on my list if we're talking.
And I'll say this: I disliked Jimmy as a person, but I loved watching him play.
Okay.
Because he it's like he was that guy. Jimmy's that guy. You know who Jimmy is in real life? I kind of joke with it. Jimmy is Vince Vaughn's character in Wedding Crashers. He's like, can you throw an interception? He's like, buddy, I was first team all state. I can put this ball where I want it, right? Like that was Jimmy at Notre Dame. Like, dude, Jimmy, can you make this? I'm Jimmy Clausen. I can put this ball wherever I want it. You know what I mean? Like,
now.
He was fun to watch play, even though I knew he was not necessarily the most fun person to be around. And but he was a tremendous quarterback. My number 3 is Jarius Jackson. Okay. I think Jarius was another guy that his reputation is not what it should be because he did not play on great teams. That wasn't his fault. And I would argue that some of the games they won big part because of him. Jarius was a really good football player. Number 2 for me is Brady Quinn. And Brady Quinn's probably my number 1 favorite.
Okay.
So if I was going to list your way, he'd be my number 1. But he was a great player. But my number 1 is Tony Rice. And what it all comes down to is Tony was a winner. Again, if you compare numbers, it's not even close. But it's different eras, different offenses. He ran that offense about as good as you can run that offense. And when you go look at the wins that they had, I mean, Tony Rice had more wins over top 10 teams in 2 years than I would argue just about every quarterback has had combined since then. I mean, the number of wins that he had over ranked teams was just insane. I mean, just insane. I put it like this, Vince. In 1988, Notre Dame went 4-0 against teams that finished the year ranked in the top 10. They went 3-0 against teams that finished the year ranked in the top 5. Think about that. And then the next year, Notre Dame went 7-1 against teams that finished the year ranked in the top 25. So in 2 years as a starter, Tony Rice went 11-1 against teams that finished in the top 25, and he went 7-1 against teams that finished in the top 10. And he went 4-1 against teams that finished in the top 5. He had 2 wins in his career over number 1 teams that were ranked number 1 when they played. He beat Miami in 88, and he beat Colorado when Colorado was number 1 in 1989. Like, there has never been a bigger winner at Notre Dame in my lifetime. Again, my lifetime, which basically is like mid-80s on in regards to guys that I watched.
Right, exactly.
Right? I mean, think about 11-1 in 2 years against opponents that finished the season ranked in the top 25. That is absolutely insane. And that 89 team was one of the best teams that I've ever seen. And I still feel like if they don't give up that 3rd and 40 something against Miami, that goes down as one of the best 2-year eras in college football history. Because they would have won a title that year. I mean, they beat the number 1 team in the country in the Orange Bowl that year, 21-6. It wasn't close. You know what I mean? It was that stinking game at Miami, that really ruined it. And they won Miami a title that year by losing to Miami and then beating number 1 Colorado. Because if Colorado would have beat Notre Dame in the Orange Bowl, Colorado wins the championship that year. So I'm going with number 1 for Tony Rice as number 1. All right. So, I mean, Vince, 11-1 over 2 years.
Oh, you get
against top 25 teams. That's insane. Again, I'm not pushing back against yours because we different criteria. If we're going off of favorite players, I'm going there.
I vaguely remember Rice playing. It was about after he was done and all that. I was 7 years old.
I get that. Totally get that. Totally. That's why I don't talk about Steve Berline because I remember Steve Berline, but I was 8 when he was a starter at Notre Dame. I don't remember Steve Berline. And somebody asked about Kevin McDougal. Again, my criteria, you got to be a starter more than 1 year. You do. Because, again, my list wasn't favorites.
Right.
Kevin Dougal's in my top 5 if we're talking favorite quarterbacks. There's no question about it. I loved Kevin McDougal. I had a very I'll explain to you off the air my awkward I met Kevin Dougal experience.
Okay.
But mine was kind of top, meaning like thinking top being the best. Right. That's where my ranking came from.
Yeah, we took that.
If I was going to go off my favorites, I would remove Jimmy as my favorites and add probably Kevin McDougal in there if we're just going to go with my favorites. But I was going off of the best, and Tony Rice's record is just, I mean, it's a little nuts. And he was pretty special. He was a pretty special player in college. All right, so somebody asked about Joe Montana. I never saw Joe Montana play
Right.
in college.
Has
I
to
mean,
be-
I was born in 1978, so I'm only going with what I saw in college. That's why I don't talk about Angelo Bertelli and John Hart, and Tom Clements, and all those kind of guys. I never saw them play. Terry Hanratty, I never saw those guys play in college, so I can't go with you. So, yeah. Kevin McDougal was my favorite quarterback. I wish Holtz would have let him throw the ball more. I agree. Again, favorite, yes, but definitely not best, because again, he was a 1-year starter. I think he threw like 9 touchdowns that year or something like that. Like he didn't throw a ton of stats. So thank you for the super K Grant, my man. Thank you very, very, very much for that. Very, very much for that. But so Irish Chi-Town, I do, and thank you for that question. I always enjoy those type of things.
It's fun.
Those are fun.
I was at one point during the thing, I'm sure Brian was like, "What is he doing?" Yeah, I was writing down quarterback names. Like,
yeah. I was like, dude, pay attention. I'm talking. Dude, we're 3 hours in, Cam.
And I suck at like coming up with lists like off the top of my head. So it's like I need to write it out and figure. Like when I
Well, that's what I was doing when you were talking. That's why I didn't know who you said at number 4. Yeah, right. Vince, are you still talking? Who do you have? No, I heard all the others. I just didn't hear you at 4. So apologies on that.
That's all good, man. Tyler Almany says, "What is the projection from grad transfer Chris Smith? What do you think Al Golden implements to the game plan from watching Ohio State, Oregon film? Oklahoma State, I assume, Oregon film. They made Ohio State it was Ohio State. Very unbalanced on offense. See, it's the OSU thing, man. I still got that going from the Fiesta Bowl, so I apologize for that. But Ohio State, Oregon from the first game last year, they made Ohio State very unbalanced on offense, etc. So start with the Chris Smith, I guess, and then move from there.
Well, I think number one, the projection is he's going to give depth. That's the biggest thing. He's going to be a depth player. He's going to, and I mean that complimentary. I mean, he's going to be part of the rotation. I think in some ways he's going to kind of fill the Howard Cross role, the one that Howard had last year. 15, 20 snaps a game, come in, penetrate, play both spots and that kind of thing. Gotcha. He may play a few more snaps, but I think that's the role. And so what I mean by that is he's not replacing Howard Cross. Howard Cross is replacing right. Yeah. Howard Cross and Jacob Lacey are going to kind of combine to replace Kurt Heinrich's role. Right. And now I think Chris Smith steps into the role they had, especially the Howard Cross role last year. Maybe the Jacob Lacey role might be a little bit, but that Jacob Lacey kind of might still have that role, right? So, kind of that third D tackle, that third or fourth D tackle that comes in, penetrate, give me 15, 20 snaps a game. I think that'll be the role for him. What do I think about what do I think Al Golden implements the game plan from watching Ohio State, Oregon film? They made Ohio State very unbalanced. Number one, I think Ohio State made themselves unbalanced in that game more than anything. I mean, even early before. So what happened was Oregon dominated them in the trenches for the most part. But that kind of went on. Ohio State forced themselves to be pass heavy that game. I mean, they just did. They purposely threw the ball a ton. Part is because I think you still didn't know what you had necessarily in Travion Henderson. I mean, he did some nice things against Minnesota, but he hadn't quite taken over that role completely yet, like he did later in the year. But it's big picture was the same thing. So there's nothing to implement there. It wasn't something schematic per se. It was our D line is better than your offensive line, and we're going to beat you up, which is kind of nuts to say because they didn't even have Kayvon Thibodeau in that game. He didn't play in that game. He was injured.
Yeah.
Because remember, he was a game time decision, and well before the game, it
was another defensive player that didn't play.
A linebacker. I think Justin Flo, is the one who didn't play in that game. But I always get him and Noah Sewell confused of who didn't play that game, but I'm pretty sure it was Justin Flo didn't play that game. Okay. But they didn't have two of their better front seven guys and still beat Ohio State up in the trenches. And that was a big part of it. But I think part of it was just more Ohio State. I don't think Ryan Day had a ton of faith early in the year in his run game. And so he relied on what was great. And what was great was I have the best receiving core in college football, and I believe that he did. As good as Alabama's 1-2 was, Ohio State had 1, 2, and 3. And that's what separated it. And so I feel like it was partly self-induced, but the other part is they just physically got beat up in the trenches. And I think that's a big reason Coach Stud was let go. Is you cannot be the coach at Ohio State and get your butt whooped in the trenches in your biggest games.
Agreed.
And if we're being honest, it wasn't just last year. I mean, they got their butts whooped in the trenches in 2020 against Bama. I would argue they got their butts whooped a little bit in the trenches at times in 2020 against Northwestern. They just out-talented Northwestern in the second half. But that's not a new thing. They have not had – their offensive line has not played great in recent years in some big games. And they've had the talent to play better. That's the issue. They're not playing to their ability. And I think that's why he's gone and Justin Fry is hired is because of that. That's my 2 cents.
Okie doke. Irish Gordian knot.
What did you say?
Gordian knot.
No, before that. What? Okie dokie what?
I don't even know what I said. Hit the rewind button on that one. I don't know. Okie dokie.
We're gonna need to wrap up soon. Vince is getting delirious.
I can no longer feel the bottom half of the body, so that's part of it.
Oh my goodness.
Crank up the heat down here. Can you compare the arm talent and arm strength of Tyler Buchner with Ian Book and Drew Pine?
I don't think it's quite well, that's arm talent is the best in that group by far. Arm strength, I need to see more of him to see if his arm is as strong as Ian Book's was vertically.
Right.
I think Tyler might have as strong, if not a stronger arm, 15 to in, but Ian threw a really nice, he could really, go back and look at the throw he had to Braden Lindsey in 2019 against Navy. That ball went about 60 yards in the air and he flicked it. Ian actually could throw the ball deep pretty effectively. He just wouldn't. And that was the problem. When he tried to, the post route against Miles Boykin for the win in 2018, when he actually tried to throw the ball deep.
Never the thing. We never said he never, people would say that he didn't have the arm strength. It's because he wouldn't throw it. It's not because he couldn't.
Now, he didn't have a cannon, but Ian had plenty of arm strength. That was not his issue. It was an unwillingness to make those throws.
He wanted to load up. He could. We've seen it. So
right. I would say arm talent, Tyler Buchner 1, Drew Pine 2, Ian Book 3. Arm strength, Tyler Buchner 1 on intermediate to short, Ian Book 1 on deep, and then the other 2, and then Drew Pine's 3rd. And that's really the only thing. Drew Pine just doesn't have a big arm. That's the thing that hurts him. He gets good zip 15 to end, but you even saw in the touchdown pass to Braden Lindsey, it's like a 35-yard touchdown pass from the far hash. He had to muscle that thing up to get it there. And Braden still had to kind of go up and make a play on it. He just doesn't have a powerful arm, but he's got a lot of other tools that work. But no, Drew Pine is what people thought Ian Book was arm strength wise.
Ooh, there you go.
It's just Drew Pine has the mind that Ian didn't.
Correct.
Drew understands the game to me a little better than Ian does.
Yeah. And I would take Drew over Ian if all things were equal.
Right. Agree. Yeah.
Irish Chi-Town, Vince, who do you think will start at wideout? Well, that's very specific. Okay, so I think it's going to be, we're talking game 1, right? So I think it's going to be Braden Lindsey. I think it's going to be Lorenzo Styles. And
Avery Davis, if he's healthy.
That would be
Let's assume he's healthy, just for the sake of argument.
Avery Davis in the slot. That's absolutely the starting 3. If he's not healthy, I think they put Lorenzo in the slot, and then I think you could either see Colsey or Merriweather at the other wide receiver spot. What do you think?
I agree with you. I think that based on what I won't be shocked. I won't be shocked if Tobias Merriweather starting this year receiver.
Yeah.
I'm not predicting it, but I won't be shocked by it.
Fair enough. And that's even if Davis is healthy?
Yeah.
Okay. So who's getting benched? Braden Lindsey?
It's not big in bench. they're going to rotate, move guys,
Yeah, he's got to start. Yeah. Somebody's not starting. So
because in some games, 2 of those guys won't start because they're going to be in 12 personnel.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, probably Lindsey. And that way you can kind of max it. Because here's the problem with Lindsey. It's kind of what we're going back to in the past. I don't want Braden playing 50 snaps a game. The sooner you start his snap clock, the sooner he reaches the point where you get diminishing returns.
Good call.
So if Braden's not a starter per se, I actually think that's better for him. He may not agree with me on this.
He wouldn't agree with you. I wouldn't think.
Which I completely understand. Right. But if I can, have him, I want Braden fresh in the third. He can make some big plays early, but I want Braden having 25 to 30 snaps under his belt early in the fourth quarter when that corner's got 50 snaps under his belt, 60 snaps under his belt, and Braden's fresh, and I'm banging that post route.
I feel like Braden Lindsey could be one heck of a sixth man kind of a situation on the wide.
In basketball, you're referring to.
You know what I mean? Yeah, no, he's not the sixth wide receiver, but like the first guy off the bench with a spark kind of situation.
Because I think Braden gives you, because then when you bring him in a game, you can bring him in different spots. You can have him and Lorenzo together, him and Avery Davis together. You can do things where him and Avery together with Lorenzo backside, but I just feel like it also limits his wear and tear. Because again, I want Braden fresh.
Yeah.
And I want him to be able to be a part of the offense where he can do a lot of things. I don't want him to be that starter that plays 60-plus snaps a game.
Sure.
I don't. Now, if he can prove they can handle it, and he proved last year he can handle volume.
Right.
But what we didn't see was Braden running by people late in games. Now, part of that was technique, and that's going to be better this year because he's finally being coached. But the other things, I just want him fresh in the fourth quarter. I want him being able to say, hey, Braden, how you feeling, Braden? I feel good, coach. I'm ready to run by this dude. Okay, let's do it. Late third quarter, early fourth quarter, mid fourth quarter, final drive of the game. I want him being that guy that's stretching, and I want him having 35 snaps. I want him having 35 snap legs when that play call is being made, not 60 snap legs.
Absolutely. Yep.
So, and it's not that he may be one of their top three receivers, but it's kind of like there were years where Kevin McHale was clearly the second best player for the Celtics, but they still brought him off the bench to make the rotation work the way that they did. And it's that kind of thing for me, Vince. All right. This is an interesting one. I think we're going to last couple questions here, and we're going to wrap this thing up and get out of here. But we got these last couple questions here.
Ben Tarnowski says, which do you think will be better this year, the run game or the pass game? Well, it depends on what's your definition of better. Like,
let's say which one plays at the highest level, not statistically, but which one you say when the game is on the line or they need a play. Would you rather have you have a drive and you've got to win a game with a drive? It's not time sensitive drive.
Right.
You can run your offense. What part of the game are you going to have the most confidence in leaning on? Obviously, the easy answer is, well, you want them both, but let's just assume that one is better than the other. What would your prediction? I mean, for me, it's easy. I think it's going to be the run game.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too.
Just because your quarterback is also a big part of that in this offense.
Be more versatile with the pass game. There's a lot more things you can do, but I think the most dynamic thing is going to be the run game, and a lot of it has to do with how good I think the offensive line is going to be, how good I think Tyler Buchner is going to be mentally, making sure he gets the ball into the right person's hands, and I think the running backs can be dynamic as well. So I will also say the running game, but it's tough because I think, again, like you said, if it's a drive to win the game, there's a lot of things you can do with the pass game, and I have a lot of faith in Tyler Buchner and the guys he's throwing the ball to, which includes Michael Mayer, All-American, right? So I have a lot of faith in the pass game. So it's kind of a toss-up.
I think the reason why it's not a toss-up for me, Vince, I agree with everything you just said. The reason why it's not a toss-up for me is because I think Notre Dame is unique this year in that they have a lot of pass game weapons that can also help in the run game. Right? And what I mean by that is, let's not forget the first touchdown that Braden Lindsey ever scored. The first two touchdowns Braden Lindsey ever scored were plays that were more run-oriented than pass-oriented. He scored it on a screen pass, which is like a run, it's catch and run, and then he scored on a reverse.
Yeah.
His first two touchdowns. He also had a jet sweep that went for 60 yards. He can impact your run game also. And then you talk about the quarterback, the impact that the quarterback can have in the run game. I think Lorenzo Styles had a jet sweep for 50-some yards. It ended up only being 30-something in the stat line because it got called back from a downfield hold. So I think statistically only like 32 yards or something like that, Vince, but he actually completed over 50 on the actual run. So I think you have more kids like that in this offense that can be impactful in the run game. Now, the counter that you could make to that is, but look what Chris Tyree is going to do in the pass game. Very fair.
Sure.
I just think there's more pass game weapons that can impact the run game that, to me, you can utilize in those instances. That makes me go over this. But at the end of the day, when I look at this offensive line, this is an offensive line that I think is going to be really good at running the football.
Sure.
And that's kind of where I come down on that. And then here's I got one or two left. This is a good one. I like that.
If you could only attend one home game this year, which one would it be? Now, caveat, is the BYU game considered a home game?
No.
Okay.
So I think this is, and the reason I say this because I think the premise of this question is experiencing Notre Dame campus, stadium, like the whole Notre Dame experience. Watching them play in Navy in Las Vegas just because they're listed as the home team, to me wouldn't count. That's me. Now, Vince, you can take it that way because you can miss. Hey, you can watch Notre Dame play and go to Vegas. That may be your thing. I'm going to answer it in regards to a true home game at Notre Dame Stadium.
That's easy for me then. If we're nixing the BYU game, and if we were using it, it would be a toss up. If we're not using it, it's easy. It's November 5th, Clemson. I missed the home game against Clemson last time because of all the restrictions and everything. I want to see that game.
I was actually at that game.
Oh, you were. I was.
Because we only going to have one person there.
Yes.
Vince is still pissed at me about that. I was wondering who kept slashing, letting air out of my tires. Now I know. Now I know.
Wasn't there because
yeah,
that's what I'm really excited.
Did y'all see that? Did y'all see Vince's face? He got real salty with me on that one. I wasn't at that game. Whose fault is that, Brian? Yeah. Fair enough. I think the other reason that's an easier one this year is because there's two games to me, Vince, that are great games to see at Notre Dame Stadium. One is your biggest rival, USC, obviously.
Sure.
The other's Navy. And I've said this before, and Vince, you have agreed with me on this.
Oh, yeah.
I would always encourage Notre Dame fans, you've got to see a Notre Dame Navy game at Notre Dame Stadium once in your life. You have to do it. However, both of those games are away from home this year.
Sure.
So it's easy to go with what's the biggest game. And here's your options: Marshall, Cal, Stanford, UNLV, Boston College, or Navy, or Clemson. Having said that, if you are someone who does not like home, like the cold, then the Cal game is going to be the game for you because that's going to be the green jersey game. There's going to be a lot of excitement on that day. Yeah, a lot of buzz. It's and then of course, anytime it's a home opener, I think those are fun days because it's the tailgating's really happening that game, that kind of stuff. So I'd say if you don't want to be at a game that could potentially be cold, like the two best home games, Vince, are Clemson and BC.
Yes.
Right. But they play BC 2 weeks after they play Clemson. That's going to potentially be very cold those 2 days.
Very well be.
If you're not someone who likes the cold, then you're going to want to, I made this dumb move several years ago. I bought my dad a really cool big Notre Dame coat.
Okay.
Well, it's a cool gift, right?
Yeah.
My dad lives in Virginia Beach.
Yeah, you're not going to use it.
Doesn't use it. So it's like, I'm trying to get him up for like a November game one year where he can bring the coat with him and wear the coat, right? So I didn't think ahead on that one. But, BC's a cool game, rivalry game. But I feel like the early season games when there's just a lot of buzz and excitement about the season and all that. But if you're okay with the cold, yeah, Clemson's the game.
And I will also say, if you're just going for the experience of Notre Dame and the campus and the tradition and all that, finding an October game, like a Stanford, for example, right in the heart of October, you get the leaves change.
Yeah,
campus is just beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
So,
it's just that they suck.
Absolutely.
That's the only problem.
What you're going to see in the stadium isn't going to be good, but the surrounding stuff is still going to be.
I guess if you're someone who wants to, here's another angle. I want to make sure that I go when they're going to win. Well, then, UNLV or Stanford would be two good options for the ones you said, Vince, because you are correct. So, look, there's a lot of times South Bend, Indiana, it gets really hot in the summer. It's really cold in the winters. But there are very few places on earth I'd rather be than in this area when it's like mid to late October than on that campus. Now, like where you and I live and like the cornfields are not there anymore, it's like, okay, it's kind of dull,
Right.
But like Notre Dame campus in mid to late October when the leaves are changing is one of the most beautiful. The only other place I'd rather be at that time of year is driving through the mountains of Virginia and West Virginia, like towards the Virginia side where they're more hilly mountains than the big giant mountains because they are all tree covered and they're orange and yellow and red and it is beautiful. It's like Charlottesville area, it gets like that.
Right.
But being on campus in Notre Dame in mid to late October, once the leaves have changed, Vince is absolutely right. It is one of the most. It's like that's when you walk on campus and you have your Rudy's dad moment. And this is the most beautiful thing these eyes have ever seen.
True.
Yeah.
It's true. Yeah. And I feel that way. I've been to home games every year since 2004, and it never changes. For me, never, ever, ever changes. That's one of the reasons I'm still a fan.
Yep. No doubt. Those are definitely those are Vince is right. Those are good games to get to, because again, if you want it to feel like Notre Dame, right? Like when you think about Notre Dame, you think Snow Bowl, things like that, and it's definitely that. There's no doubt. So Vince, that's going to do it for us today, man. Why don't you go ahead and take us out of here?
Fantastic. Well, thanks everybody for sticking with us for the daily mailbag. Really appreciate all of the conversation and the questions that were going on in the chat today. There was
last couple days has been great conversation in the chats. Been sticking to the topic at hand.
Telling you, it's been fantastic. And our buddy Archer has been like the leader of the conversation over here. It's been awesome. So I will give him credit for that. But thank you everybody for hanging out with us today. Really appreciate it. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, hit that notification bell, and share with your friends and family. And if you're listening on the podcast, give us a 5-star review and tune in tonight. IB Nation Sports Talk at 6 o'clock with Sean Stiers. Make sure you tune in for that. What do you got?
Tomorrow, our daily mailbag, or our Friday mailbag, is going to start at noon.
Yes, that's right.
So we're going to move the daily mailbag up to noon, because at 2 o'clock, apparently I didn't get a notification today, Vince, for
really? Yeah. Somebody else, they didn't get one either. So I don't know.
So that's a YouTube problem. That's not, that's not on us.
Yeah.
So then 2 o'clock, we're going to go live to discuss the pending decision of Jaden Greathouse. So we will have 2 shows tomorrow. We'll have a mailbag for about an hour and a half tomorrow. And then after Jaden Greathouse breakdown, we'll then kind of go back to the mailbag. So, just keep that in mind. So if you don't get a noon tomorrow, Eastern is when we'll start our mailbag. It'll just be me and Ryan tomorrow. Vince is getting ready to go on vacation. And then after that, Jaden Greathouse at 2 o'clock. We'll make his decision. We'll carry that live. If you don't get a question answered tomorrow, bring it back to the Jaden Greathouse commit thing, because once he makes his decision and we discuss it and we do all that, we'll then do a Q&A, which you don't have to focus just on that. So we'll do that in order to kind of make up for the fact that we weren't able to get everyone's questions in, because I promise you, in an hour and a half, we can't get all the questions in nowadays in 3 hours.
I know, right? I know.
It's 3:25 and there's questions we're leaving out there, and it happens every week. So long gone are the days when we said our show's going to go as long as we have questions, because
it's not possible. We would never turn it off.
No.
We would never
Which we love y'all for. We really do.
It's fantastic. Are you kidding me? It's awesome. So make sure you guys tune in tonight, 6 o'clock, IB Nation Sports Talk. Tomorrow at noon kind of kicks off many hours of shows. So make sure you tune in for that. I'm very sad I will not be a part of the Friday mailbag, because everybody knows it is my favorite day of the week. And no, I did not get fired by Brian, but I am going to be off next week, going on vacation with the family. So pray for me. Extended family all in one house for a week. But we're supposed to have some fun. So anyway, thank you everybody for joining us. Really appreciate it. I look forward to talking to you all on the next time that I am on. But make sure you tune into Irish Breakdown Podcast the next time we are live.